Portugal, Portuguese pronunciation, Portugal, officially the Portuguese Republic, Portuguese, República Portuguesa, República Portuguesa, is a country located on the Iberian Peninsula, in southwestern Europe, and whose territory also includes the Macaronesian archipelagos of the Azores and Madeira. It features the westernmost point in continental Europe, and its Iberian portion is bordered to the west and south by the Atlantic Ocean and to the north and east by Spain, the sole country to have a land border with Portugal. Its archipelagos form two autonomous regions with their own regional governments. In the mainland, Alentejo region occupies the biggest area but is one of the regions in Europe with a lower population density. Lisbon is the capital and largest city by population, being also the main spot for tourists alongside Porto and Algarve. Capital and largest city: Lisbon. 38 degrees 46 minutes north, 9 degrees 9 minutes west. Official languages: Portuguese. Recognized regional languages: Mirandese. Nationality: 2022. 92.5% Portuguese nationals. 7.5% resident foreigners. Religion: 2021. 84.8% Christianity. 80.2% Catholicism. 4.6% other Christian. 14.1% no religion. 1.1% other. Demonyms: Portuguese. Government: Unitary Semi-Presidential Constitutional Republic. President: Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa. Prime Minister: Antonio Costa. Legislature: Assembly of the Republic. Establishment: First County, 868. Second County, 1095. Sovereignty: June 24, 1128. Kingdom: July 25, 1139. Treaty of Zamora, October 5, 1143. Restoration: December 1, 1640. First Constitution: September 23, 1822. Republic: October 5, 1910. Democratization: April 25, 1974. Current Constitution: April 25, 1976. EEC accession: January 1, 1986. Area: Total: 92,230 square kilometers, 35,610 square miles, 109th. Water: percent: 1.2, 2015. Population: 2022 estimate. Neutral increase 10,467,366, 90th. 2021 census. Neutral decrease 10,343,066. Density: 113.5/km2, 294.0/sq mi. GDP, PPP. 2023 estimate. Total increase $465.1 billion, 50th. Per capita increase $45,227, 42nd. GDP, nominal. 2023 estimate. Total increase $276.4 billion, 49th. Per capita increase $26,879, 41st. Gini, 2020. Positive decrease 31.2. Medium. HDI, 2021. Increase 0.866. Very high 38th. Currency: Euro, Euro. Time zone: UTC, wet. UTC-1, Atlantic/Azores. Summer, DST. UTC+1, West. UTC, Atlantic/Azores. Note: Continental Portugal and Madeira use Western European Time/Western European Summer Time. The Azores are 1 hour behind. Mirandese, spoken in some villages of the municipality of Miranda do Douro, was officially recognized in 1999, Lei N. Degree 799/29 de Janeiro, awarding it an official right of use. Portuguese Sign Language is also recognized. By country of birth. Portuguese Constitution adopted in 1976 with several subsequent minor revisions, between 1982 and 2005. One of the oldest countries in Europe, its territory has been continuously settled, invaded and fought over since prehistoric times. The territory was inhabited by the Celtic and Iberian peoples, such as the Lusitanians, the Galicians, the Celtici, Turguli, and the Conii. These peoples had some commercial and cultural contact with Phoenicians, ancient Greeks, and Carthaginians. It was later ruled by the Romans, followed by the invasions of Germanic peoples, most prominently, the Suebi and the Visigoths, together with the Alans, and later the Moors, who were eventually expelled during the Reconquista. Founded first as a county within the Kingdom of Leon in 868, the country officially gained its independence as the Kingdom of Portugal with the Treaty of Zamora in 1143. Portugal made numerous discoveries and maritime explorations outside the Mediterranean, and by the 15th and 16th centuries established one of the longest-lived maritime and commercial empires, becoming one of the main economic and political powers of the time. At the end of the 16th century, Portugal fought Spain in a war over the succession to the Portuguese crown, leading to the Iberian Union. The Portuguese Restoration War reinstated the House of Braganza in 1640 after a period of substantial loss to Portugal. By the early 19th century, the accumulative crisis, events such as the 1755 Lisbon earthquake, the country's occupation during the Napoleonic Wars, and the resulting independence of Brazil in 1822 led to a marked decay of Portugal's prior opulence. This was followed by the civil war between liberal constitutionalists and conservative absolutists over royal succession, which lasted from 1828 to 1834. The 1910 revolution deposed Portugal's centuries-old monarchy, and established the democratic but unstable Portuguese First Republic, later being superseded by the Estado Novo, New State, authoritarian regime. Democracy was restored after the Carnation Revolution, 1974, ending the Portuguese colonial war and eventually losing its remaining colonial possessions. Portugal has left a profound cultural, architectural and linguistic influence across the globe, with a legacy of around 250 million Portuguese speakers around the world. It is a developed country with an advanced economy. A member of the United Nations, the European Union, the Schengen Area and the Council of Europe, COE, Portugal was also one of the founding members of NATO, the Eurozone, the OECD, and the Community of Portuguese Language Countries. Etymology. The word Portugal derives from the combined Roman-Celtic place name Portus Cale, a settlement where present-day's conurbation of Porto and Vila Nova de Gaia, or simply, Gaia, stand, along the banks of River Douro in the north of what is now Portugal. The name of Porto stems from the Latin word for port or harbor, portus, with the second element Cale's meaning and precise origin being less clear. The mainstream explanation points to an ethnonym derived from the Calaisi, also known as Galaisi peoples, who occupied the northwest of the Iberian Peninsula. The names Cale and Calaisi are the origin of today's Gaia and Galicia. Another theory proposes that Cale or Caye is a derivation of the Celtic word for port, like the Irish Calad or Scottish Gaelic Calla. These explanations would require the pre-Roman language of the area to have been a branch of Q Celtic, which is not generally accepted because the region's pre-Roman language was Galician. However, scholars like Jean Marcail and Trenoy proposed that the Celtic branches all share the same origin, and place names such as Cael, Gal, Gaia, Calais, Galatia, Galicia, Gaelic, Gael, Gaul, Latin, Gallia, Wales, Cornwall, Wallonia and others all stem from one linguistic root. A further explanation proposes Gatolo as having been the origin of present-day Braga, Santiago de Compostela, and consequently the wider regions of northern Portugal and Galicia. A different theory has it that Cala was the name of a Celtic goddess, drawing a comparison with the Gaelic Caoilche, a supernatural hag. Further still, some French scholars believe the name may have come from Portus Gallus, the port of the Gauls or Celts. Around 200 BC, the Romans took the Iberian Peninsula from the Carthaginians during the Second Punic War. In the process they conquered Cael, renaming it Portus Cael, Port of Cael, and incorporating it in the province of Galicia with its capital in Bracara Augusta, modern-day Braga, Portugal. During the Middle Ages, the region around Portus Cael became known by the Suebi and Visigoths as Portugal. The name Portugal evolved into Portugal during the 7th and 8th centuries, and by the 9th century, that term was used extensively to refer to the region between the rivers Douro and Mijo. By the 11th and 12th centuries, Portugal, Portugalia, Portugallo or Portugalii was already referred to as Portugal. The 14th century Middle French name for the country, Portingal, which added an intrusive /n/ sound through the process of excrescence, spread to Middle English. Middle English variant spellings included Portingal, Portingale, Portingale and Portingale. The spelling Portingale is found in Chaucer's epilogue to the Nun's Priest's Tale. These variants survive in the Torrent of Portingale, a Middle English romance composed around 1400, and Old Robin of Portingale, an English child ballad. Portingal and variants were also used in Scots and survive in the Cornish name for the country, Portingal. History of Portugal. Prehistory. The early history of Portugal is shared with the rest of the Iberian Peninsula located in southwestern Europe. The name of Portugal derives from the joined Romano-Celtic name Portus Cael. The region was settled by pre-Celts and Celts, giving origin to peoples like the Galaici, Lusitanians, Celtici and Sinites, also known as Conii. Some coastal areas were visited by Phoenicians, Carthaginians and ancient Greeks. It was incorporated in the Roman Republic dominions as Lusitania and part of Galatia, after 45 BC until 298 AD. The region of present-day Portugal was inhabited by Neanderthals and then by Homo sapiens, who roamed the borderless region of the northern Iberian Peninsula. These were subsistence societies, and although they did not establish prosperous settlements, they did form organized societies. Neolithic Portugal experimented with domestication of herding animals, the raising of some cereal crops and fluvial or marine fishing. It is believed by some scholars that early in the first millennium BC, several waves of Celts invaded Portugal from Central Europe and intermarried with the local populations, forming different tribes. Another theory suggests that Celts inhabited western Iberia/Portugal well before any large Celtic migrations from Central Europe. In addition, a number of linguists expert in ancient Celtic have presented compelling evidence that the Tartessian language, once spoken in parts of SW Spain and SW Portugal, is at least Proto-Celtic in structure. Modern archaeology and research shows a Portuguese root to the Celts in Portugal and elsewhere. During that period and until the Roman invasions, the Castro culture, a variation of the Urnfield culture also known as Urnenfelder culture, was prolific in Portugal and modern Galicia. This culture, together with the surviving elements of the Atlantic megalithic culture and the contributions that come from the more western Mediterranean cultures, ended up in what has been called the cultura castreja or Castro culture. This designation refers to the characteristic Celtic populations called Duin, Dwin, or Don in Gaelic and that the Romans called Castrae in their chronicles. Based on the Roman chronicles about the Calaeaci peoples, along with the Liber Gabala Iren narrations and the interpretation of the abundant archaeological remains throughout the northern half of Portugal and Galicia, it is possible to infer that there was a matriarchal society, with a military and religious aristocracy probably of the feudal type. Citation needed. The figures of maximum authority were the chieftain, chief tribal, of military type and with authority in his castro or clan, and the druid, mainly referring to medical and religious functions that could be common to several castros. The Celtic cosmogony remained homogeneous due to the ability of the druids to meet in councils with the druids of other areas, which ensured the transmission of knowledge and the most significant events. Citation needed. The first documentary references to Castro society are provided by chroniclers of Roman military campaigns such as Strabo, Herodotus, and Pliny the Elder among others, about the social organization, and describing the inhabitants of these territories, the Galaeci of northern Portugal as a group of barbarians who spend the day fighting and the night eating, drinking, and dancing under the moon. There were other similar tribes, and chief among them were the Lusitanians. The core area of these people lay in inland central Portugal, while numerous other related tribes existed such as the Celtici of Alentejo, and the Sanites or Conii of the Algarve. Among the tribes or subdivisions were the Bracari, Coalerni, Equaci, Grovii, Interamici, Luni, Luenki, Limici, Narbaci, Nematati, Pajuri, Quakerni, Serbi, Tamagani, Tapali, Turguli, Turguli Vetters, Turguli Oppidani, Turodi, and Zoili. A few small, semi-permanent, commercial coastal settlements, such as Tavira, were also founded in the Algarve region by Phoenicians, Carthaginians. Roman Lusitania and Galaecia. Romans first invaded the Iberian Peninsula in 219 BC. The Carthaginians, Rome's adversary in the Punic Wars, were expelled from their coastal colonies. During the last days of Julius Caesar, almost the entire peninsula was annexed to the Roman Republic. The Roman conquest of what is now part of Portugal took almost 200 years and took many lives of young soldiers and the lives of those who were sentenced to a certain death in the slave mines when not sold as slaves to other parts of the empire. Roman occupation suffered a severe setback in 155 BC, when a rebellion began in the north. The Lusitanians and other native tribes, under the leadership of Viriathus, wrested control of all of western Iberia. Rome sent numerous legions and its best generals to Lusitania to quell the rebellion, but to no avail. The Lusitanians kept conquering territory. The Roman leaders decided to change their strategy. They bribed Viriathus's allies to kill him. In 139 BC, Viriathus was assassinated and Tautelus became leader of the Lusitanians. In 27 BC, Lusitania gained the status of Roman province. Later, a northern province of Lusitania was formed, known as Galaecia, with capital in Bracara Augusta, today's Braga. There are still many ruins of castros, hill forts, throughout modern Portugal and remains of the Castro culture. Some urban remains are quite large, like Conumbriga and Mirobriga. The former, beyond being one of the largest Roman settlements in Portugal, is also classified as a national monument. Conumbriga lies 16 kilometers, 10 miles, from Coimbra, which in turn was the ancient Eminium. The site also has a museum that displays objects found by archaeologists during their excavations. Several works of engineering, such as baths, temples, bridges, roads, circuses, theaters and laymen's homes are preserved throughout the country. Coins, some coined in Lusitanian land, as well as numerous pieces of ceramics, were also found. Contemporary historians include Paulus Orosius, c. 375–418, and Hydatius, c. 400–469, bishop of Aquae Flavii, who reported on the final years of the Roman rule and arrival of the Germanic tribes. Germanic kingdoms, the Suebi. In the early 5th century, Germanic tribes, namely the Suebi and the Vandals, Silingi and Hasdingi, together with their allies, the Sarmatians and Alans, invaded the Iberian peninsula where they would form their kingdom. The kingdom of the Suebi was the Germanic post-Roman kingdom, established in the former Roman provinces of Galaecia-Lusitania. 5th century vestiges of Alan settlements were found in Alenquer, from Old Germanic Alan Kirk, Temple of the Alans, Coimbra and Lisbon. About 410 and during the 6th century it became a formally declared kingdom of the Suebi, where King Hermeric made a peace treaty with the Galaetians before passing his domains to Richila, his son. In 448 Richila died, leaving the state in expansion to Re-Caire. After the defeat against the Visigoths, the Suebian kingdom was divided, with Frantan and Aguiulfo ruling simultaneously. Both reigned from 456 to 457, the year in which Maldras, 457 to 459, reunified the kingdom. He was assassinated after a failed Roman Visigothic conspiracy. Although the conspiracy did not achieve its true purposes, the Suebian kingdom was again divided between two kings, Frumer, Frumerio 459 to 463, and Remismund, Remismundo, son of Maldras, 459 to 469, who would reunify his father's kingdom in 463. He would be forced to adopt Arianism in 465 due to the Visigoth influence. By 500, the Visigothic kingdom had been installed in Iberia. It was based in Toledo and advancing westwards. They became a threat to the Suebian rule. After the death of Remismund in 469 a dark period set in, where virtually all written texts and accounts disappear. This period lasted until 550. The only thing known about this period is that Theodmund, Teodemundo, most probably ruled the Suebians. The dark period ended with the reign of Carrierico, 550 to 559, who reinstalled Catholic Christianity in 550. He was succeeded by Theodomar, 559 to 570, during whose reign the First Council of Braga, 561, was held. The councils represented an advance in the organization of the territory, Paritium Sueverum, Suebian parish, and the Christianization of the pagan population, De Correction Rusticorum, under the auspices of Saint Martin of Braga, São Martinho de Braga. After the death of Teodomiro, Miro, 570 to 583, was his successor. During his reign, the Second Council of Braga, 572, was held. The Visigothic civil war began in 577. Miro intervened. Later in 583 he also organized an unsuccessful expedition to reconquer Seville. During the return from this failed operation Miro died. The Visigoths. In the Suebian kingdom many internal struggles continued to take place. Eborico, Eurico, 583 to 584, was dethroned by Andeca, Audica 584 to 585, who failed to prevent the Visigothic invasion led by Leovigildo. The Visigothic invasion, completed in 585, turned the once rich and fertile kingdom of the Suebi into the sixth province of the Gothic kingdom. Leovigild was crowned king of Galaecia, Hispania, and Gallia Narbonensis. For the next 300 years and by the year 700, the entire Iberian Peninsula was ruled by the Visigoths. Under the Visigoths, Galicia was a well-defined space governed by a doge of its own. Doges at this time were related to the monarchy and acted as princes in all matters. Both governors Wamba and Witiza, acted as doge. They would later become kings in Toledo. These two became known as the Witizians, who headquartered in the northwest and called on the Arab invaders from the south to be their allies in the struggle for power in 711. King Rodrigo, was killed while opposing this invasion, thus becoming the last Visigothic king of Iberia. From the various Germanic groups who settled in western Iberia, the Suebi left the strongest lasting cultural legacy in what is today Portugal, Galicia and western fringes of Asturias. According to Dan Stanislavski, the Portuguese way of living in regions north of the Tagus is mostly inherited from the Suebi, in which small farms prevail, distinct from the large properties of southern Portugal. Bracara Augusta, the modern city of Braga and former capital of Galicia, became the capital of the Suebi. Apart from cultural and some linguistic traces, the Suebians left the highest Germanic genetic contribution of the Iberian Peninsula in Portugal and Galicia, self-published source. Orosius, at that time resident in Hispania, shows a rather pacific initial settlement, the newcomers working their lands or serving as bodyguards of the locals. Another Germanic group that accompanied the Suebi and settled in Galicia were the Buri. They settled in the region between the rivers Cavado and Hamem, in the area known as Terras de Burro, lands of the Buri. Islamic period and the Reconquista. Today's continental Portugal, along with most of modern Spain, was part of Al-Andalus between 726 and 1249, following the Umayyad Caliphate conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. This rule lasted from some decades in the north to 5 centuries in the south. After defeating the Visigoths in only a few months, the Umayyad Caliphate started expanding rapidly in the peninsula. Beginning in 726, the land that is now Portugal became part of the vast Umayyad Caliphate's empire of Damascus, which stretched from the Indus River in the Indian subcontinent up to the south of France, until its collapse in 750. That year the west of the empire gained its independence under Abd ar-Rahman I with the establishment of the Emirate of Córdoba. After almost 2 centuries, the emirate became the Caliphate of Córdoba in 929. Until its dissolution a century later in 1031 into no less than 23 small kingdoms, called Taifa kingdoms. The governors of the Taifas each proclaimed themselves emir of their provinces and established diplomatic relations with the Christian kingdoms of the north. Most of present-day Portugal fell into the hands of the Taifa of Badajoz of the Aftisid dynasty, and after a short spell of an ephemeral Taifa of Lisbon in 1022, fell under the dominion of the Taifa of Seville of the Abbadids poets. The Taifa period ended with the conquest of the Almoravids, who came from Morocco in 1086, winning a decisive victory at the Battle of Sagrajas, followed a century later in 1147, after the second period of Taifa, by the Almohads, also from Marrakesh. Al-Andalus was divided into different districts called Qura. Garb al-Andalus at its largest consisted of 10 curas, each with a distinct capital and governor. The main cities of the period in Portugal were in the southern half of the country: Beja, Silves, Alcácer do Sal, Santarém and Lisbon. The Muslim population of the region consisted mainly of native Iberian converts to Islam, the so-called Mualad or Muladi, and Arabs. The Arabs were principally noblemen from Syria and Yemen, and though few in numbers, they constituted the elite of the population. The Berbers were originally from the Rif and Atlas Mountains region of North Africa and were nomads. County of Portugal. An Asturian Visigothic noble named Pelagius of Asturias was elected leader in 718 by many of the ousted Visigoth nobles. Pelagius called for the remnant of the Christian Visigothic armies to rebel against the Moors and regroup in the unconquered northern Asturian highlands, better known today as the Cantabrian Mountains, in what is today the small mountain region in northwestern Spain, adjacent to the Bay of Biscay. Pelagius' plan was to use the Cantabrian Mountains as a place of refuge and protection from the invading Moors. He then aimed to regroup the Iberian Peninsula's Christian armies and use the Cantabrian Mountains as a springboard from which to regain their lands. In the process, after defeating the Moors in the Battle of Covadonga in 722, Pelagius was proclaimed king, thus founding the Christian Kingdom of Asturias and starting the War of Christian Reconquest known in Portuguese as the Reconquista Crista. At the end of the 9th century, the region of Portugal, between the rivers Mijo and Douro, was reconquered from the Moors by the nobleman and knight Vimara Perez on the orders of King Alfonso III of Asturias. Finding that the region had previously had two major cities, Portugal in the coast and Braga in the interior, with many towns that were now deserted, he decided to repopulate and rebuild them with Portuguese and Galician refugees and other Christians. Apart from the Arabs from the south, the coastal regions in the north were also attacked by Norman and Viking raiders mainly from 844. The last great invasion, through the Mijo River, ended with the defeat of Olaf II Haraldsson in 1014 against the Galician nobility who also stopped further advances into the county of Portugal. Count Vimara Perez organized the region he had reconquered, and elevated it to the status of county, naming it the County of Portugal after the region's major port city, Portugal or modern Porto. One of the first cities Vimara Perez founded at this time is Vimaranes, known today as Guimarães, the birthplace of the Portuguese nation or the cradle city, Cidade Berco in Portuguese. After annexing the County of Portugal into one of the several counties that made up the Kingdom of Asturias, King Alfonso III of Asturias knighted Vimara Perez, in 868, as the first Count of Portugal, Portugal. The region became known as Portugal, and simultaneously Portugalia, the County of Portugal. Later the Kingdom of Asturias was divided into a number of Christian kingdoms in northern Iberia due to dynastic divisions of inheritance among the king's offspring. With the forced abdication of Alfonso III the Great of Asturias by his sons in 910, the Kingdom of Asturias split into three separate kingdoms. The three kingdoms were eventually reunited in 924 under the crown of Leon. In 1093, Alfonso VI of Leon bestowed the county to Henry of Burgundy and married him to his illegitimate daughter, Teresa of Leon, for his role in reconquering the land from Moors. Henry based his newly formed county in Bracara Augusta, modern Braga, capital city of the ancient Roman province, and also previous capital of several kingdoms over the first millennia. Independence and Alphonsine era. On June 24, 1128, the Battle of São Mamede occurred near Guimarães. Afonso Henriques, Count of Portugal, defeated his mother Countess Teresa and her lover Fernão Pérez de Trava, thereby establishing himself as sole leader. Afonso then turned his arms against the Moors in the south. Afonso's campaigns were successful and, on July 25, 1139, he obtained an overwhelming victory in the Battle of Ourique, and straight after was unanimously proclaimed King of Portugal by his soldiers. This is traditionally taken as the occasion when the County of Portugal, as a fief of the Kingdom of Leon, was transformed into the independent Kingdom of Portugal. Afonso then established the first of the Portuguese Cortes at Lamigo, where he was crowned by the Archbishop of Braga, though the validity of the Cortes of Lamigo has been disputed and called a myth created during the Portuguese Restoration War. Afonso was recognized in 1143 by King Alfonso VII of Leon, and in 1179 by Pope Alexander III. During the Reconquista period, Christians reconquered the Iberian Peninsula from Moorish domination. Afonso Henriques and his successors, aided by military monastic orders, pushed southward to drive out the Moors. At this time, Portugal covered about half of its present area. In 1249, the Reconquista ended with the capture of the Algarve and complete expulsion of the last Moorish settlements on the southern coast, giving Portugal its present-day borders, with minor exceptions. In one of these situations of conflict with the Kingdom of Castile, Dynasties of Portugal signed with the King Fernando IV of Castile, who was represented, when a minor, by his mother the Queen Maria de Molina, the Treaty of Alcanisses, 1297, which stipulated that Portugal abolished agreed treaties against the Kingdom of Castile for supporting the infant Juan de Castilla. This treaty established among other things the border demarcation between the Kingdom of Portugal and the Kingdom of Leon, where the disputed town of Olivenza was included. The reigns of Dynasties, Afonso IV, Alphonse IV, and Pedro I, Peter I, for the most part saw peace with the Christian kingdoms of Iberia. In 1348 and 1349 Portugal, like the rest of Europe, was devastated by the Black Death. In 1373, Portugal made an alliance with England, which is one of the oldest standing alliances in the world. Over time, this went far beyond geopolitical and military cooperation, protecting both nations' interests in Africa, the Americas and Asia against French, Spanish and Dutch rivals, and maintained strong trade and cultural ties between the two old European allies. In the Oporto region, in particular, there is visible English influence to this day. Joanine era and Age of Discoveries. In 1383, John I of Castile, husband of Beatrice of Portugal and son-in-law of Ferdinand I of Portugal, claimed the throne of Portugal. A faction of petty noblemen and commoners, led by John of Avish, later King John I of Portugal, and commanded by General Nuno Alvarez Pereira, defeated the Castilians in the Battle of Aljubarrota. With this battle, the House of Avish became the ruling house of Portugal. The new ruling dynasty would proceed to push Portugal to the limelight of European politics and culture, creating and sponsoring works of literature, like the Crónicas del Rey de João I by Fernão Lopes, the first riding and hunting manual Livro de Ensinança de Bem Cavalgar toda Sila and O Leal Conselheiro, both by King Edward of Portugal, and the Portuguese translations of Cicero's De Officiis and Seneca's De Beneficiis by the well-travelled Prince Peter of Coimbra, as well as his magnum opus, Tratado de Virtuosa Benfeitoria. In an effort of solidification and centralization of royal power, the monarchs of this dynasty also ordered the compilation, organization and publication of the first three compilations of laws in Portugal, the Ordenacos del Rey de Duarte, which was never enforced, the Ordenacos Afonsinas, whose application and enforcement was not uniform across the realm, and the Ordenacos Manuelinos, which took advantage of the printing press to reach every corner of the kingdom. The Avis dynasty also sponsored works of architecture like the Mosteiro de Batalha, literally, the Monastery of the Battle, and led to the creation of the Manueline style of architecture in the 16th century. Portugal also spearheaded European exploration of the world and the Age of Discovery. Prince Henry the Navigator, son of King John I of Portugal, became the main sponsor and patron of this endeavor. During this period, Portugal explored the Atlantic Ocean, discovering the Atlantic archipelagos, the Azores, Madeira, and Cape Verde, explored the African coast, colonized selected areas of Africa, discovered an eastern route to India via the Cape of Good Hope, discovered Brazil, explored the Indian Ocean, established trading routes throughout most of southern Asia, and sent the first direct European maritime trade and diplomatic missions to China and Japan. In 1415, Portugal acquired the first of its overseas colonies by conquering Ceuta, the first prosperous Islamic trade center in North Africa. There followed the first discoveries in the Atlantic, Madeira and the Azores, which led to the first colonization movements. In 1422, by decree of King John I, Portugal officially abandoned the previous dating system, the era of Caesar, and adopted the Anno Domini system, therefore becoming the last Catholic realm to do so. Throughout the 15th century, Portuguese explorers sailed the coast of Africa, establishing trading posts for several common types of tradable commodities at the time, ranging from gold to slaves, as they looked for a route to India and its spices, which were coveted in Europe. The Treaty of Tordesillas, intended to resolve the dispute that had been created following the return of Christopher Columbus, was made by Pope Alexander VI, the mediator between Portugal and Spain. It was signed on June 7, 1494, and divided the newly discovered lands outside Europe between the two countries along a meridian 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands, off the west coast of Africa. In 1498, Vasco da Gama accomplished what Columbus set out to do and became the first European to reach India by sea, bringing economic prosperity to Portugal and its population of 1.7 million residents, and helping to start the Portuguese Renaissance. In 1500, the Portuguese explorer Gaspar Cortereal reached what is now Canada and founded the town of Portugal Covas T. Phillips, Newfoundland and Labrador, long before the French and English in the 17th century, and being just one of many Portuguese colonizations of the Americas. In 1500, Pedro Álvares Cabral discovered Brazil and claimed it for Portugal. 10 years later, Afonso de Albuquerque conquered Goa in India, Muscat and Ormuz in the Persian Strait, and Malacca, now a state in Malaysia. Thus, the Portuguese Empire held dominion over commerce in the Indian Ocean and South Atlantic. Portuguese sailors set out to reach Eastern Asia by sailing eastward from Europe, landing in such places as Taiwan, Japan, the island of Timor, and in the Moluccas. Although for a long period it was believed the Dutch were the first Europeans to arrive in Australia, there is also some evidence that the Portuguese may have discovered Australia in 1521. From 1519 to 1522, Ferdinand Magellan, Fernão de Magalhães, organized a Spanish expedition to the East Indies which resulted in the first circumnavigation of the globe. Magellan never made it back to Europe as he was killed by natives in the Philippines in 1521. The Treaty of Zaragoza, signed on April 22, 1529 between Portugal and Spain, specified the anti-meridian to the line of demarcation specified in the Treaty of Tordesillas. All these factors made Portugal one of the world's major economic, military, and political powers from the 15th century until the late 16th century, Iberian Union, Restoration and early Brigantine era. Portugal voluntarily entered a dynastic union between 1580 and 1640. This occurred because the last two kings of the House of Avish, King Sebastian, who died in the Battle of Alcácer Quibir in Morocco, and his great-uncle and successor, King Cardinal Henry of Portugal, both died without heirs, resulting in the Portuguese succession crisis of 1580. Subsequently, Philip II of Spain claimed the throne and was accepted as Philip I of Portugal. Portugal did not lose its formal independence, briefly forming a union of kingdoms. At this time Spain was a geographic territory. The joining of the two crowns deprived Portugal of an independent foreign policy and led to its involvement in the 80 Years' War between Spain and the Netherlands. War led to a deterioration of the relations with Portugal's oldest ally, England, and the loss of Hormuz, a strategic trading post located between Iran and Oman. From 1595 to 1663, the Dutch-Portuguese War primarily involved the Dutch companies invading many Portuguese colonies and commercial interests in Brazil, Africa, India and the Far East, resulting in the loss of the Portuguese Indian Sea trade monopoly. In 1640, John IV of Portugal spearheaded an uprising backed by disgruntled nobles and was proclaimed king. The Portuguese Restoration War ended the 60-year period of the Iberian Union under the House of Habsburg. This was the beginning of the House of Braganza, which reigned in Portugal until 1910. King John IV's eldest son came to reign as Afonso VI, however his physical and mental disabilities left him overpowered by Luís de Vasconcelos e Sousa, 3rd Count of Castelo Melhor. In a palace coup organized by the king's wife, Maria Francisca of Savoy, and his brother, Pedro, Duke of Beja, King Afonso VI was declared mentally incompetent and exiled first to the Azores and then to the royal palace of Sintra, outside Lisbon. After Afonso's death, Pedro came to the throne as King Pedro II. Pedro's reign saw the consolidation of national independence, imperial expansion, and investment in domestic production. Pedro II's son, John V, saw a reign characterized by the influx of gold into the coffers of the royal treasury, supplied largely by the royal fifth, a tax on precious metals, that was received from the Portuguese colonies of Brazil and Maranhão. Disregarding traditional Portuguese institutions of governance, John V acted as an absolute monarch, nearly depleting the country's tax revenues on ambitious architectural works, most notably Mafra Palace, and on commissions and editions for his sizable art and literary collections. Owing to his craving for international diplomatic recognition, John also spent large sums on the embassies he sent to the courts of Europe, the most famous being those he sent to Paris in 1715 and Rome in 1716. Official estimates, and most estimates made so far, place the number of Portuguese migrants to colonial Brazil during the gold rush of the 18th century at 600,000. This represented one of the largest movements of European populations to their colonies in the Americas during colonial times. Pombaline era and Enlightenment. In 1738, Fidalgo Sebastio José de Carvalho e Melo, later ennobled as the first Marquis of Pombal, began a diplomatic career as the Portuguese ambassador in London and later in Vienna. The Queen Consort of Portugal, Archduchess Maria Anna of Austria, was fond of Carvalho e Melo, and after his first wife died, she arranged the widowed Carvalho e Melo's second marriage to the daughter of the Austrian Field Marshal Leopold Joseph, Count von Daun. King John V, however, was not pleased and recalled Carvalho e Melo to Portugal in 1749. John V died the following year and his son, Joseph I, was crowned. In contrast to his father, Joseph I was fond of Carvalho e Melo, and with the Queen Mother's approval, he appointed Carvalho e Melo as Minister of Foreign Affairs. E. Melo also made an important contribution to the study of seismology by designing a detailed inquiry on the effects of the earthquake, the Parochial Memories of 1758, that was sent to every parish in the country. This wealth of information allows modern scientists to reconstruct the event with some degree of scientific precision while also giving current historians an immense amount of demographic, topographic and prosopographic information on the rest of the kingdom as well as information on its urban and rural areas. Following the earthquake, Joseph I gave his prime minister even more power, and Carvalho de Melo became a powerful, progressive dictator. As his power grew, his enemies increased in number, and bitter disputes with the upper nobility became frequent. In 1758 Joseph I was wounded in an attempted assassination. The Tavora family and the Duke of Aveiro were implicated and summarily executed after a quick trial. The following year, the Jesuits were suppressed and expelled from the country and their assets confiscated by the crown. Carvalho e Melo spared none involved. Even women and children, notably, 8-year-old Leonor de Almeida Portugal, imprisoned in a convent for 19 years. This was the final stroke that crushed all opposition by publicly demonstrating even the aristocracy was powerless before the king's loyal minister. Joseph I ennobled Carvalho e Melo as Count of Oeiras in 1759. In 1762, Spain invaded Portuguese territory as part of the 7 Years' War, but by 1763 the status quo between Spain and Portugal before the war had been restored. Following the Tavora affair, the new Count of Oeiras knew no opposition. Further titled Marquês de Pombal, in 1770, he effectively ruled Portugal until Joseph I's death in 1777. The new ruler, Queen Maria I of Portugal, disliked the Marquês de Pombal because of the power he amassed, and never forgave him for the ruthlessness with which he dispatched the Tavora family, and upon her accession to the throne, she withdrew all his political offices. The Marquês de Pombal was banished to his estate at Pombal, where he died in 1782. However, historians also argue that Pombal's enlightenment, while far-reaching, was primarily a mechanism for enhancing autocracy at the expense of individual liberty and especially an apparatus for crushing opposition, suppressing criticism, and furthering colonial economic exploitation as well as intensifying book censorship and consolidating personal control and profit. Napoleonic era. With the invasions by Napoleon, Portugal began a slow but inexorable decline that lasted until the 20th century. This decline was hastened by the independence of Brazil, the country's largest colonial possession. In the autumn of 1807, Napoleon moved French troops through Spain to invade Portugal. From 1807 to 1811, British-Portuguese forces successfully fought against the French invasion of Portugal in the Peninsular War, during which the royal family and the Portuguese nobility, including Maria I, relocated to the Portuguese territory of Brazil, at that time a colony of the Portuguese Empire, in South America. This episode is known as the transfer of the Portuguese court to Brazil. In 1807, as Napoleon's army closed in on Lisbon, João VI of Portugal, the Prince Regent, transferred his court to Brazil and established Rio de Janeiro as the capital of the Portuguese Empire. In 1815, Brazil was declared a kingdom and the Kingdom of Portugal was united with it, forming a pluricontinental state, the United Kingdom of Portugal, Brazil and the Algarves. As a result of the change in its status and the arrival of the Portuguese royal family, Brazilian administrative, civic, economical, military, educational, and scientific apparatus were expanded and highly modernized. Portuguese and their allied British troops fought against the French invasion of Portugal, and by 1815 the situation in Europe had cooled down sufficiently that João VI would have been able to return safely to Lisbon. However, the King of Portugal remained in Brazil until the Liberal Revolution of 1820, which started in Porto, demanded his return to Lisbon in 1821. Thus he returned to Portugal but left his son Pedro in charge of Brazil. When the Portuguese government attempted the following year to return the Kingdom of Brazil to subordinate status, his son Pedro, with the overwhelming support of the Brazilian elites, declared Brazil's independence from Portugal. Cisplatina, today's sovereign state of Uruguay, in the south, was one of the last additions to the territory of Brazil under Portuguese rule. Brazilian independence was recognized in 1825, whereby Emperor Pedro I granted to his father the titular honor of Emperor of Brazil. John VI's death in 1826 caused serious questions in his succession. Though Pedro was his heir, and reigned briefly as Pedro IV, his status as a Brazilian monarch was seen as an impediment to holding the Portuguese throne by both nations. Pedro abdicated in favor of his daughter, Maria II, Mary II. However, Pedro's brother, Infante Miguel, claimed the throne in protest. After a proposal for Miguel and Maria to marry failed, Miguel seized power as King Miguel I, in 1828. In order to defend his daughter's rights to the throne, Pedro launched the Liberal Wars to reinstall his daughter and establish a constitutional monarchy in Portugal. The war ended in 1834, with Miguel's defeat, the promulgation of a constitution, and the reinstatement of Queen Maria II. Constitutional monarchy. Other episodes during this period of the Portuguese presence in Africa include the 1890 British ultimatum. This forced the Portuguese military to retreat from the land between the Portuguese colonies of Mozambique and Angola, most of present-day Zimbabwe and Zambia, which had been claimed by Portugal and included in its pink map, which clashed with British aspirations to create a Cape to Cairo railway. The Portuguese territories in Africa were Cape Verde, São Tomé and Príncipe, Portuguese Guinea, Angola, and Mozambique. The tiny fortress of São João Baptista da Ajuda on the coast of Dahomey was also under Portuguese rule. In addition, Portugal still ruled the Asian territories of Portuguese India, Portuguese Timor and Portuguese Macau. On February 1, 1908, King Dom Carlos I of Portugal and his heir apparent and his eldest son, Prince Royal Dom Luís Felipe, Duke of Braganza, were assassinated in Lisbon in the Terreiro do Paco by two Portuguese Republican activist revolutionaries, Alfredo Luís da Costa and Manuel Baica. Under his rule, Portugal had been declared bankrupt twice, first on June 14, 1892, and then again on May 10, 1902, causing social turmoil, economic disturbances, angry protests, revolts and criticism of the monarchy. His second and youngest son, Manuel II of Portugal, became the new king, but was eventually overthrown by the October 5, 1910 Portuguese Republican Revolution, which abolished the monarchy and installed a republican government in Portugal, causing him and his royal family to flee into exile in London, England. First Republic and Estado Novo. The new republic had many problems. Portugal had 45 different governments in just 15 years. During World War I, 1914 to 1918, Portugal helped the Allies fight the Central Powers, however the war hurt its weak economy. Political instability and economic weaknesses were fertile ground for chaos and unrest during the First Portuguese Republic. These conditions would lead to the failed monarchy of the North, May 28, 1926 coup d'état, and the creation of the national dictatorship, Ditadura Nacional. This in turn led to the establishment of the right-wing dictatorship of the Estado Novo under Antonio de Oliveira Salazar in 1933. Portugal remained neutral in World War II. From the 1940s to the 1960s, Portugal was a founding member of NATO, OECD and the European Free Trade Association, EFTA. Gradually, new economic development projects and relocation of mainland Portuguese citizens into the overseas provinces in Africa were initiated, with Angola and Mozambique, as the largest and richest overseas territories, being the main targets of those initiatives. These actions were used to affirm Portugal's status as a transcontinental nation and not as a colonial empire. After India attained independence in 1947, pro-Indian residents of Dadra and Nagar Haveli, with the support of the Indian government and the help of pro-independence organizations, separated the territories of Dadra and Nagar Haveli from Portuguese rule in 1954. In 1961, Fort of São João Baptista de Ajuta's annexation by the Republic of Dahomey was the start of a process that led to the final dissolution of the centuries-old Portuguese Empire. According to the census of 1921, São João Baptista de Ajuda had 5 inhabitants and, at the moment of the ultimatum by the Dahomey government, it had only 2 inhabitants representing Portuguese sovereignty. Another forcible retreat from overseas territories occurred in December 1961 when Portugal refused to relinquish the territories of Goa, Daman and Diu in India. As a result, the Portuguese army and navy were involved in armed conflict in its colony of Portuguese India against the Indian armed forces. The operations resulted in the defeat and surrender of the limited Portuguese defensive garrison, which was forced to surrender to a much larger military force. The outcome was the loss of the remaining Portuguese territories in the Indian subcontinent. The Portuguese regime refused to recognize Indian sovereignty over the annexed territories, which continued to be represented in Portugal's National Assembly until the military coup of 1974. Also in the early 1960s, independence movements in the Portuguese overseas provinces of Angola, Mozambique and Guinea in Africa, resulted in the Portuguese Colonial War, 1961–1974. The war lasted 13 years, mobilized around 1.4 million men for military or for civilian support service, and led to big casualties from military to civilians, plus evacuations of thousands from war zones. Throughout the colonial war period, Portugal had to deal with increasing dissent, arms embargoes and other punitive sanctions imposed by most of the international community. However, the authoritarian and conservative Estado Novo regime, first installed and governed by Antonio de Oliveira Salazar and from 1968 onwards led by Marcelo Caetano, tried to preserve a vast centuries-long intercontinental empire with a total area of 2,168,071 square kilometers, 837,097 square miles. Carnation Revolution and European integration. The Portuguese government and army resisted the decolonization of its overseas territories until April 1974, when a left-wing military coup in Lisbon, known as the Carnation Revolution, led the way for the independence of the overseas territories in Africa and Asia, as well as for the restoration of democracy after 2 years of a transitional period known as Processo Revolucionário MCUSO. This period was characterized by social turmoil and power disputes between left and right-wing political forces. By the summer of 1975, the tension between these was so high that the country was on the verge of civil war. The forces connected to the extreme left wing launched a further coup d'état on November 25, but the Group of Nine, a moderate military faction, immediately initiated a counter-coup. The main episode of this confrontation was the successful assault on the barracks of the left-wing dominated military police regiment by the moderate forces of the Commando Regiment, resulting in 3 soldiers killed in action. The Group of Nine emerged victorious, thus preventing the establishment of a communist state in Portugal and ending the period of political instability in the country. The retreat from the overseas territories and the acceptance of its independence terms by Portuguese head representatives for overseas negotiations, which would create independent states in 1975, prompted a mass exodus of Portuguese citizens from Portugal's African territories, mostly from Portuguese Angola and Mozambique. Over 1 million Portuguese refugees fled the former Portuguese provinces as white settlers were usually not considered part of the new identities of the former Portuguese colonies in Africa and Asia. Mário Soares and Antonio de Almeida Santos were charged with organizing the independence of Portugal's overseas territories. By 1975, all the Portuguese African territories were independent and Portugal held its first democratic elections in 50 years. Portugal continued to be governed by a Junta de Salvação Nacional until the Portuguese legislative election of 1976. It was won by the Portuguese Socialist Party, PS, and Mário Soares, its leader, became Prime Minister of the first constitutional government on July 23. Mário Soares would be Prime Minister from 1976 to 1978 and again from 1983 to 1985. In this capacity, Soares tried to resume the economic growth and development record that had been achieved before the Carnation Revolution, during the last decade of the previous regime. He initiated the process of accession to the European Economic Community, EEC, by starting accession negotiations as early as 1977. After the transition to democracy, Portugal bounced between socialism and adherence to the neoliberal model. Land reform and nationalizations were enforced. The Portuguese constitution, approved in 1976, was rewritten in order to accommodate socialist and communist principles. Until the constitutional revisions of 1982 and 1989, the constitution was a document with numerous references to socialism, the rights of workers, and the desirability of a socialist economy. Portugal's economic situation after the revolution obliged the government to pursue International Monetary Fund, IMF, monitored stabilization programs in 1977 to 78 and 1983 to 85. In 1986, Portugal, along with Spain, joined the European Economic Community, EEC, that later became the European Union, EU. In the following years, Portugal's economy progressed considerably as a result of EEC/EU structural and cohesion funds and Portuguese companies' easier access to foreign markets. Portugal's last overseas and Asian colonial territory, Macau, was peacefully handed over to the People's Republic of China, PRC, on December 20, 1999, under the 1987 joint declaration that set the terms for Macau's handover from Portugal to the PRC. In 2002, the independence of East Timor, Asia, was formally recognized by Portugal, after an incomplete decolonization process that was started in 1975 because of the Carnation Revolution, but interrupted by an Indonesian armed invasion and occupation. On March 26, 1995, Portugal started to implement Schengen area rules, eliminating border controls with other Schengen members while simultaneously strengthening border controls with non-member states. In 1996, the country was a co-founder of the Community of Portuguese Language Countries, CPLP, headquartered in Lisbon. In 1996, Jorge Sampaio became president. He won re-election in January 2001. Expo 98 took place in Portugal, and in 1999 it was one of the founding countries of the Euro and the Eurozone. On July 5, 2004, José Manuel Barroso, then Prime Minister of Portugal, was nominated President of the European Commission, the most powerful office in the European Union. On December 1, 2009, the Treaty of Lisbon entered into force, after it had been signed by the European Union member states on December 13, 2007 in the Jerónimos Monastery, in Lisbon, enhancing the efficiency and democratic legitimacy of the Union and improving the coherence of its action. Ireland was the only EU state to hold a democratic referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. It was initially rejected by voters in 2008. Economic disruption and an unsustainable growth in government debt during the financial crisis of 2007 to 2008 led the country to negotiate in 2011 with the IMF and the European Union, through the European Financial Stability Mechanism, EFSM, and the European Financial Stability Facility, EFSF, a loan to help the country stabilize its finances. Geography. Portugal occupies an area on the Iberian Peninsula, referred to as the continent by most Portuguese, and two archipelagos in the Atlantic Ocean, Madeira and the Azores. It lies between latitudes 30 degrees and 42 degrees north, and longitudes 32 degrees and 6 degrees west. Mainland Portugal is split by its main river, the Tagus, that flows from Spain and disgorges in the Tagus estuary at Lisbon, before escaping into the Atlantic. The northern landscape is mountainous towards the interior with several plateaus indented by river valleys, whereas the south, including the Algarve and the Alentejo regions, is characterized by rolling plains. Portugal's highest peak is the similarly named Mount Pico on the island of Pico in the Azores. This ancient volcano, with a height of 2,351 meters (7,713 feet), is an iconic symbol of the Azores. Serra da Estrela on the mainland, the summit being 1,991 meters (6,532 feet) above sea level, is an important seasonal attraction for skiers and winter sports enthusiasts. The archipelagos of Madeira and the Azores are scattered within the Atlantic Ocean, the Azores straddling the mid-Atlantic ridge on a tectonic triple junction, and Madeira along a range formed by in-plate hotspot geology. Geologically, these islands were formed by volcanic and seismic events. The last terrestrial volcanic eruption occurred in 1957–58, Capelinhos, and minor earthquakes occur sporadically, usually of low intensity. The exclusive economic zone, a sea zone over which the Portuguese have special rights in exploration and use of marine resources, covers an area of 1,727,408 square kilometers, 666,956 square miles. This is the third largest exclusive economic zone of the European Union and the 20th largest in the world. Climate. Portugal is mainly characterized by a Mediterranean climate, CSA in the south, central interior, and the Douro River Valley, CSB in the north, central west and Vicentine coast, temperate maritime climate, CFB, in the mainland northwestern highlands and mountains, and in some high-altitude zones of the Azorian Islands, a semi-arid climate in certain parts of the Beja district far south, BSK, and in Porto Santo Island, BSH, a warm desert climate, BWH, in the Selvagens Islands and a humid subtropical climate in the western Azores, CFA, according to the Köppen-Geiger climate classification. It is one of the warmest countries in Europe. The annual average temperature in mainland Portugal varies from 10 to 12 degrees Celsius, 50.0 to 53.6 degrees Fahrenheit, in the mountainous interior north to 16 to 18 degrees Celsius, 60.8 to 64.4 degrees Fahrenheit, in the south and on the Guadiana River basin. There are, however, variations from the highlands to the lowlands. Spanish biologist Salvador Rivas Martinez presents several different bioclimatic zones for Portugal. The Algarve, separated from the Alentejo region by mountains reaching up to 900 meters, 3,000 feet, in Alto de Foya, has a climate similar to that of the southern coastal areas of Spain or southwest Australia. Annual average rainfall in the mainland varies from just over 3,200 millimeters, 126.0 in, on the Penedigueiras National Park to less than 500 millimeters, 19.7 in southern parts of Alentejo. Mount Pico is recognized as receiving the largest annual rainfall, over 6,250 millimeters, 246.1 per year, in Portugal, according to Instituto Português do Mar e da Atmosfera. In some areas, such as the Guadiana Basin, annual diurnal average temperatures can be as high as 24 degrees Celsius 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and summer's highest temperatures are routinely over 40 degrees Celsius 104 degrees Fahrenheit. The record high of 47.4 degrees Celsius 117.3 degrees Fahrenheit was recorded in Amarelija, although this might not be the hottest spot in summer, according to satellite readings. Owing to rough topography, the Madeira and Azorian archipelagos have a narrower temperature range, with annual average temperatures exceeding 20 degrees Celsius 68 degrees Fahrenheit in some parts of the coast, according to the Portuguese Meteorological Institute. Some islands in Azores do have drier months in the summer.
In our study of world history,
the islands of the Azores have been identified as having a Mediterranean climate,
society with
CSA
cross-cultural
and CSB
connections,
types,
adaptation
while
to
some
and control over
such as
changing
Flores
environments,
or Corvo,
and
are
sophisticated
classified as humid
political and religious
subtropical
developments.
CFA,
All of
transitioning
these
into an
themes are
oceanic
evident
climate, CFB,
examination
at
of the
higher
origins of
altitudes.
Egypt.
According to Köppen-Geiger
Egyptian leaders unified
classification,
Upper and Lower Egypt around
Porto Santo Island in
3100
Madeira has a
BCE,
warm
creating
semi-arid
a powerful
climate,
ancient
BSH.
state. Developments
The
in the
Savage
millennia
Islands,
preceding
which are
unification,
part of the regional territory
including
of
the
Madeira
sharing of
and the
innovations
nature
and
reserve, are
responses
unique
to
in
environmental
being
change,
classified as a
set the
desert
stage
climate,
for the
BWH,
emergence of
with
the
an
Egyptian
annual average
civilization.
rainfall of approximately
Cross-cultural
150
connections
millimeters,
introduced the people of
5.9
Northeast
in.
Africa to domesticated
The
wheat
sea surface temperature
and
in these
barley,
islands
two of the
varies from
crops that they grew and
18.5
whose
degrees
surpluses
Celsius
supported the process of
65.3
social
degrees Fahrenheit
differentiation
in
and
winter to
eventually
23
the
to 24
pharaonic,
degrees
elite,
Celsius
and skilled classes of ancient
73.4
Egypt.
to 75.2
People in
degrees Fahrenheit.
Northeast
in the summer
Africa had likely been
reaching
gathering
25
wild barley
degrees
since
Celsius
before 10,000 BCE.
77.0 degrees Fahrenheit.
However, sharing
biodiversity.
in the knowledge spreading from the Fertile Crescent
Portugal
around
is located on
7000
the Mediterranean
BCE, they
basin,
began cultivating
the third most
wheat and
diverse
barley and
hotspot
also
of
keeping
flora in the
domesticated
world.
animals, including
Due
sheep
to its
and goats.
geographical and climatic
At that time,
context, between the
agricultural
Atlantic and
production and
Mediterranean,
herding were possible
Portugal
in areas
has a high
that are
level
today
of
part of the Sahara
biodiversity
Desert.
on land and at sea.
The period was much wetter
It is
than
home
now.
to 6 terrestrial
People in the
ecoregions,
region settled into
Azores
small
temperate
communities
mixed forests,
and
Cantabrian
archaeological
mixed forests,
evidence of
Madeira
hearths,
evergreen
grinding
forests,
stones,
Iberian
and storage
sclerophyllus
silos show
and
the growth of
semi-deciduous
settlements
forests,
in
northwest
areas that
Iberian
today are
montane
not well
forests,
watered enough
and
for
southwest
agricultural
Iberian
production.
Mediterranean
The presence
sclerophyllus
of
and mixed
crocodile
forests. Over
bones,
22%
along
of
with
its
similar
land
pottery
area
styles,
is included
also
in the Natura
suggest a history
2000
of
network,
contact between
including
communities
62 special
emerging
conservation
along the
areas
Nile River
and 88
and these
types of
settlements
protected
farther west.
landscape natural habitats.
However, environmental change
Eucalyptus,
was leading to
non-native,
the
commercial
desiccation or drying out of
plantations,
areas
cork
not
oak
adjacent
and
to the Nile
maritime
River,
pine
and
together
by
make
about
up 71% of the
5000
total
BCE,
forested area
it was no
of
longer
continental
possible
Portugal,
to farm much
followed
beyond
by
the
the home
floodplain
oak,
of the Nile
the stone
River.
pine, the other
Many
oak
people
trees,
adapted by moving
Q.
towards the
robur,
Nile River,
Q.
and the
Virginia
Nile River
and
became
Q.
increasingly
Pyrenaica,
important to
and the
Egypt's
sweet
populations.
chestnut, respectively.
The Nile River flows south
In
to
Madeira,
north, fed
Lori
by two
Silva,
main river
recognized
systems,
as a
the
World
White Nile
Heritage
and
Site, dominates
the
the
Blue
landscape.
Nile. The White
especially
Nile
on
flows
the northern
steadily
slope.
throughout the year and has its
The
origins
predominant
in the Great
species
Lakes
in
region
this
of
forest
East Africa.
include Laurus
The Blue
novocanariensis,
Nile originates in the
Apollonius
Ethiopian
barbajana,
highlands and
Ocotia
brings
fotens, and Persea
floodwaters
indica.
up past
Before
the first
human
cataract
occupation,
in the
the
summers.
Azores were also
Cataracts
rich
are
in dense
generally
Lori
considered
Silva
impassable
forests.
by boat
Today,
due to
these
their
native
shallows,
forests are
rocks, and
undermined by the
rapids.
introduced Pittosporum
Comparatively,
undulatum
the
and
floodplain of the
Cryptomeria
Nile River
japonica.
is narrow, leading,
There have been
especially
several projects aimed
with
to
the
recover the
desiccation
Lori
of the
Silva
surrounding
present in
areas
the Azores.
to high population densities
Remnants
close
of
to the
these
river.
Lori Silva forests
The
are
winds
also present
blow
in
north to
continental
south,
Portugal
in
with
the
its
opposite
few living
direction of the
testimonies,
river flow,
Laurus
thus
nobilis,
facilitating
Prunus lusitanica,
trade and
Arbutus
contact
unido,
between Upper
Marica
Egypt
faya,
to the
and
south
Rhododendron
and Lower
ponticum.
Egypt to the north.
These geographical
Upper
and
and
climatic conditions
Lower
facilitate
Egypt
the
lie north of
introduction
the
of
first
exotic
cataract,
species
usually
that later
allowing
turn
river
to be
traffic to
invasive and
proceed
destructive to the
uninterrupted.
native habitats.
Throughout the territory,
Around 20%
Egyptian
of the total
views
number
of the
of
Nile
extant
generally
species in
recognize the
continental
river's
Portugal
centrality
are
to
exotic.
life as
In
demonstrated
Madeira,
in the
around
Into the Nile,
36% and in the Azores,
to approximately
around 70%
2100
species
BCE.
are exotic.
The praise-filled
Due to
ode
this, Portugal
to the
was
Nile
placed
River begins,
168th
Hail to thee, O
globally out of
Nile,
172
who
countries on the Forest
manifests
Landscape
thyself
Integrity
over this
Index
land,
in
and comes to
2019.
give life to
Portugal
Egypt.
is the second country
7.
in Europe
The course
with the
of the
highest
Nile
number
River
of threatened
definitely
animal and plant species,
impacted settlement patterns,
488
while the river
as
also
of 2020.
allowed for trade
Portugal
and
as
the
a
development of
whole
larger
is an important stopover for
agricultural
migratory
communities.
bird species.
At
The
the tail
southern
end of
marshes
that era of
the eastern
desiccation,
Algarve,
from
Ria Formosa,
about
Castro
3600 to
Marin, and the Lisbon
3300
region,
BCE,
Tagus
complex
estuary,
societies
Sado
formed in
estuary, hosting
areas
various
adjacent to the
aquatic
Nile
bird
River.
species, the
These
Bonelli's eagle
communities
and Egyptian vulture
exerted
on the northern
increased
valleys
influence
of the
over their
Douro
environments,
International, the black stork
exhibited
and griffin
social
vulture on the
differentiation,
Tagus
and showed
International,
evidence
the seabird
labor
sanctuaries of the Savage
specialization.
Islands and Berlengas
For
and
example,
the highlands
people
of
in the
Madeira and
settlements
São
of
Miguel
Naganda and Hierakonpolis
represent
in
the
Upper
great diversity
Egypt
of wild
cleared
avian
trees
species,
and built dikes,
around
canals,
450 in continental
early
Portugal,
irrigation
not only
systems.
migratory but
By
also
about
endemic, e.g.
3500
Trocas
BCE,
pigeon,
they
Azores bullfinch,
used
or
these
exotic,
methods to quadruple
crested
the amount
myna,
of
pin-tailed wida.
cleared, arable land
The
and
large
could support
mammalian
population.
species of Portugal,
Densities
the
of
fallow
up to
deer,
1,000
red
people
deer,
per square
roe deer, Iberian
mile.
ibex,
Just
wild
as one
boar,
example,
red fox,
recent archaeological
Iberian wolf,
finds
and Iberian lynx
at
were once
Hierakonpolis
widespread
also show
throughout
evidence
the country,
of both social,
but intense hunting,
differential
habitat
and
degradation,
specialization
and
with
growing
separate
pressure
burials.
from agriculture and
For
livestock
the settlement's
reduced
elite,
population
the oldest known
numbers on a
painted
large scale in the
tomb
19th and
and the
early
remnants of a
20th
large-scale
century.
brewery,
Others, such as the
capable of
Portuguese
producing up
ibex,
to
were even
300
led to
gallons of
extinction.
beer a
Today,
day.
these animals
It
are
is believed that
re-expanding
early
their native
leaders
range.
in Naganda,
Smaller mammals
Hierakonpolis,
include the
and
red
similar
squirrel,
communities cemented
European badger,
their
Eurasian
roles by
otter,
claiming
Egyptian
control over the
mongoose,
environment.
Granada hare,
As
European
rainmakers or
rabbit,
commanders of the
common
floods.
genet, European
Over time,
wildcat, among others.
Some of these leaders created
Due
divine
to their
kingships,
isolated location,
asserting
the
their right
volcanic
to even
islands
more
of the
power
Azores,
and access
Madeira and
to
Salvages,
resources,
part of
power that they
Macaronesia,
legitimized
have
by
many
claiming
endemic
special
species
relationships
that have
with,
evolved
or even
independently
descent
from their
gods.
European, African,
Once
and
Egypt was
occasionally
unified,
American relatives.
pharaohs ruled as divine
The
kings,
Portuguese
as
west
the
coast is
personification
part of
of
the
the
four
gods.
major eastern boundary
They promised
upwelling
order in the
systems of the
universe.
ocean.
When things
This seasonal upwelling
went
system,
well,
typically
the pharaohs
seen
were
during the
credited
summer
with
months,
agricultural
brings cooler,
productivity and the
nutrient-rich
success of the
water
state.
up to the sea surface,
There was no
promoting
separation
phytoplankton
between
growth,
religion and the state in
zooplankton
ancient
development,
Egypt.
and the subsequent
The
rich
palette of
diversity
Narmer,
in
see
pelagic
figure
fish and other
2.6
marine
and figure
invertebrates.
2.7,
This,
which is used
adding
to date
to
the
its large
unification
EEZ, makes
of
Portugal
Egypt,
one of the
shows
largest
signs
per
that King
capita
Narmer
fish
legitimized
consumers
his
in the
rule,
world.
in part, by claiming a
Sardines, Sardina
relationship
pocharis,
with the gods.
and horse mackerel,
King
Trachurus
Narmer,
trachurus,
who
are
is referred
collected
to
in
in
the
some
thousands
texts as
every
Menes,
year.
is commonly
While blue
recognized
whiting,
as the first
monkfish,
unifier of
Atlantic cod,
upper
cephalopods,
to the south
skates,
and lower
or any
to the
other
north.
form of seafood are
Egypt in
traditionally
approximately
fished in the local coastal
3100
villages.
BCE, see map.
This upwelling also allows
2.7
Portugal to have
unification
kelp
brought
forests,
together
which
Egypt
are otherwise very
the
uncommon
first
or
cataract at
non-existent
Aswan
on the
to the Nile
Mediterranean.
Delta. The palette of Narmer, which
73%
was
of the
found
freshwater fish occurring in the
Hierakonpolis,
Iberian
shows
Peninsula
King
are
Narmer's
endemic,
conquest
the largest
of
out of
both
any region
regions.
in Europe.
The right side
Many
in
of
figure
these endemic
2.6
species are concentrated
shows
in
him
bodies
slaying
of
an
water
enemy
of
of
the
Upper
central
Egypt.
western region,
The
one
largest
exclusively
figure,
endemic.
Narmer, is wearing
These
the crown
and other bodies of water
of
throughout
Upper
the
Egypt and
peninsula
beheading a
are
rival
mostly
king,
temporary
while
and prone to drought every
standing
year,
atop
placing
conquered
most of
enemies.
these species
The left
under
side
threatened status.
also shows him as a conqueror,
Around 24
wearing
to
the
28 species
crown of Lower
cetacean
Egypt
roam
and
through
directing
the
flag
Azores,
bearers.
making it one of
To
four
mark his
places in the
victory,
world where most species
religious
of this
imagery
order
appears.
occur.
In the
Starting
inclusion
in
of
the
the goddess Hathor
mid-19th
at the
century
top
and ceasing in
of the palette
1984,
as well as the
whaling,
falcon, a
especially
reference
of sperm whale,
to Horus,
heavily
the
exploited
patron
this
god
diversity.
of Hierakonpolis, who,
Beginning in the early
later
90s,
in dynastic
whale
Egypt
watching
became the
quickly
god of
grew to
sun
popularity and
and
is now
kingship.
one of the main economic
Both sides
activities
of the
in the
palette of
Portuguese
Narmer also
archipelago.
have some of the
Some
earliest known
protected areas in
hieroglyphs.
Portugal other than the ones
Hieroglyphics
previously
emerged
mentioned
as written
include
text,
the Serras de
combining
Candeiros
pictograms,
with its
a
limestone
pictorial symbol
formations,
for a word or
paleontological
phrase,
history,
and
great
phonograms,
diversity
a symbol,
in bats and orchids,
representing
the
a
southwest
sound during the
Alentejo and
period of
Vicentine Coast Natural
unification,
Park with its well-preserved,
tax
wild
assessment
coastline.
and collection.
The
Likely
Montesinho
necessitated
Natural
the
Park,
initial
which
development
hosts
of
some of the only populations of
hieroglyphics.
Iberian wolf and
Ancient
recent sightings
Egyptians
of
eventually
Iberian brown
used
bear, which had been
3
considered
different scripts,
extinct in the country,
hieroglyphic,
among
hieratic,
other species.
and demotic.
Government and
Hieroglyphics
politics.
remained the script
Portugal has
of
been a
choice for ritual
semi-presidential
texts.
representative democratic
Students of
republic
Egyptian
since the ratification of
history
the
are most
Constitution
familiar
of
with hieroglyphics
1976,
as they were
with
usually
Lisbon,
what artists
the
used
nation's
to record the
largest
history
city,
of Egypt's
as its
elite.
capital.
For example,
The Constitution
skilled
grants
artisans
the division
used
or
hieroglyphs
separation
to
of
chronicle
powers
glorified
among four
accounts of their
sovereignty
patrons'
bodies.
lives on the sides of their tombs.
The President of the
The
Republic,
Egyptians
the
developed
government,
hieratic
the
and
Assembly
demotic,
of the
the
Republic,
two other
and the
scripts,
courts.
slightly later and used
The President, who is elected
for
elected to a
administrative,
5-year term,
commercial,
has
and
an
many other
executive role.
purposes.
The current president
Egyptian
is Marcelo
administration
Rebelo de
tended to
Souza.
using
The
and
Assembly of
papyrus
the
to
Republic
maintain
is
its
a
official
single-chamber
records.
parliament
On
composed
the
of
other
a maximum
hand,
of
literate people used
230
ostraca,
deputies elected for a
pieces of
4-year
broken
term.
pottery and chips of
The
limestone
government is
for
headed
less
by the
formal
Prime
notes and
Minister,
communications.
currently Antonio Costa, and includes
The past
ministers and
decades,
secretaries of
archaeologists
state.
have uncovered a treasure
The
trove
courts
of
are
ostraca
organized
that start
into
to tell
several
us about
levels, among the
the lives
judicial,
of the literate elite
administrative,
and
and
skilled
fiscal
craftsmen.
branches.
Just like
The Supreme
Mesopotamia,
Courts are
ancient
institutions
Egypt
of
had one
last
of
resort/appeal.
the oldest
A
written scripts
13-member
found anywhere in the
constitutional
world.
court oversees the
In addition to one of the
constitutionality
earliest
of the
writing
laws.
systems in Egyptian paper,
Portugal
papyrus,
operates a multi-party
archaeologists
system of competitive
have credited ancient
legislatures
Egyptians with
local
a number of other
administrative governments
innovations
at the national,
for
regional,
construction
and local
purposes.
levels.
Ancient
The Assembly
Egyptians
of the
invented
Republic,
the ramp and
regional
lever.
assemblies, and
They
local
also developed a
municipalities and
12-month
parishes
calendar with
are dominated by two political
365
parties,
days,
the Socialist
glassmaking
Party
skill,
and the Social
arithmetic,
Democratic Party,
including one
in
of the
addition
earliest
to
decimal systems,
the Liberal
and
Initiative, the Unitary
geometry
Democratic Coalition,
and medical procedures
Portuguese
to heal broken
Communist
bones
Party
and
and
relieve
Ecologist
fevers.
Party, the Greens,
Finally,
and the Left
Egyptians
Bloc, which garner
used
between
stone carving
5 and
techniques and other
15%
crafting
of the
skills
vote
and tools
regularly.
that were shared throughout the Mediterranean.
Presidency of the Republic. The head of state of Portugal is the President of the Republic, elected to a 5-year term by direct, universal suffrage. Presidential powers include the appointment of the Prime Minister and the other members of the government, where the President takes into account the results of legislative elections, dismissing the Prime Minister, dissolving the Assembly of the Republic, to call early elections, vetoing legislation, which may be overridden by the Assembly, and declaring a state of war or siege. The President has also supervisory and reserve powers and is the ex officio Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. The President is advised on issues of importance by the Council of State, which is composed of 6 senior civilian officers, any former presidents elected under the 1976 Constitution, 5 members chosen by the Assembly, and 5 selected by the President. Government. The government is headed by the presidentially appointed Prime Minister, also including 1 or more deputy prime ministers, ministers, secretaries of state and undersecretaries of state. The government is both the organ of sovereignty that conducts the general politics of the country and the superior body of the public administration. It has essentially executive powers, but has also limited legislative powers.
Mind hungry
The
for
government
knowledge.
can
We've
legislate
got something
about
for
its own
everyone.
organization,
Also,
about
feel
areas
free to
covered by
introduce yourself in the
legislative
comments section
authorizations
below.
conceded by
Let
the
us know
Assembly
what
of the
subjects or
Republic
topics
and
you're
about
interested
the
in,
specific regulation
or if you
of
have any
generalist
questions or
laws issued
suggestions
by
for
the
future
Assembly.
videos. We're all
The
about
Council
creating
of
a vibrant
Ministers,
learning
under
community
the
here at
presidency of the Prime
StudyPH74.
Minister, or the President
Ancient and
of
early
Portugal
medieval
at the
India.
latter's request,
Chronology.
and the ministers, may also
2600
include
to
1 or more deputy
1700
prime
BCE
ministers,
Harappan
acts
Indus
as the
Valley
cabinet.
civilization.
Each government is required to
1700 to
define the
600
broad
BCE
outline of its
Vedic
policies
age.
in a program,
1700
to the
1000
Assembly for a
BCE
mandatory
early
period
Vedic
of
age.
debate.
1000
The
to
failure of
600
the Assembly
BCE
to
later
reject the
Vedic
government
age
program
321
by an absolute majority of
184
deputies
BCE
confirms
Mauryan
the
Empire
cabinet
2nd
in
century
office.
BCE to
Parliament.
3rd century CE
The
Kushan
Assembly of the
Kingdom
Republic,
320
in
550
Lisbon, is the
CE
national
Gupta
parliament
Empire.
of Portugal.
600 to
It is the main
1300
legislative
CE
body,
early medieval
although the
India.
government also has limited
1206 to
legislative powers.
1526 CE Delhi
The
Sultanate.
Assembly of the Republic is a
3.2
unicameral
introduction,
body
a
composed
political
of up to
overview.
230 deputies.
Our knowledge of the ancient world has
elected
been
by
radically
universal
altered by
suffrage
impressive
according to a
archaeological
system of closed party
discoveries over the last 2
centuries.
centuries.
Deputies serve
Prior to
four-year
the 20th
terms of
century.
office,
For
unless
instance,
the president
historians
dissolves the assembly and calls
believe
for new
that
elections.
India's history began in the second
Currently
millennium
the government,
BCE, when a
PS,
people known
has
as
an
Indo-Aryans
absolute majority
migrated
of
into the
seats
Indian
in
subcontinent and created a new
The
civilization.
PSD is the main opposition
Yet,
party,
even during
alongside Che
the 19th
liberal
century British
initiative,
explorers and officials were
PCP,
curious about brick
Pan
mounds
and Lever,
dotting the
foreign relations
landscape of northwest India,
government
where Pakistan
purchased them
is
and
today.
established a natural
A large
reserve
one
area
was located
covering
in a
the
village
whole
named
archipelago. Harappa, the islands have been claimed by Spain since 1911. A British army engineer, and the dispute Sir Alexander some periods of political tension because he also found other artifacts among the main problem, such as a seal with an inscription. Small islands. He was been not so much their quite dismayed that railway contractors were pilfering these Portugal's exclusive economic zone. When he became the director of Great Britain's Archaeological Survey in 1872, he ordered protection for these ruins added to UNESCO's but the excavation of Harappa did not begin until 1920, and neither the Archaeological Survey nor Indian archaeologists understood their significance until this time. As his female same-sex couple turned out to was an ancient city dating back to since May 13, 3rd millennium BCE, and this bill was only one part of a much larger civilization by President Marcelo Rebelo Northwest India. As of January 2017, discovery of this lost civilization identity, the timeline for India's legal process of gender and name change over 1,000 years, making it easier the Indus Valley civilization their sex 2600 to 1700 BCE. At August now 2018, stands at the beginning. The right to gender of India's long gender expression self-determination became protected. Like the states of intersex minors became protected by law and Egypt, from unnecessary medical procedures. Foundations for that the minor gender identity were established by Paleolithic protections from discrimination on the basis of sex characteristics also became protected and then by Neolithic agriculturalists who settled into euthanasia villages. Has been legalized during the third millennium after BCE, several reviews building on these foundations. Urban nationals emerged along the Indus River, along with other elements that contribute to, but who can still decide making a civilization have the legal right to request this civilization dying. However, faded away by 1700 non-residents BCE, are not allowed and to was followed by a new stage euthanasia in Portugal. History. Only a small number of other countries India like saw Belgium, waves of migration Colombia, from the mountainous northwest Netherlands by a people who refer to themselves Spain as currently allow for assisted the Aryans brought a distinctive language administrative and divisions of life to the northern half administratively, of India, and Portugal first migrated into the 308 municipalities, pushed east along the Ganges River and settled down into a life of farming and which after a reform in 2013 as they interacted with indigenous people, a new period in India's history took shape. Portuguese. That period is known as the Vedic municipality 1700 to 600 along with the national government. Are the during the long course of the Vedic administrative units states formed in northern by the government of Portugal. The surplus example, from farming and pastoralism allowed people to engage in a multitude of other occupations, although maybe for a lively catchment for the defining villages thus grew in number and some became towns. For statistical purposes, the Portuguese government also identifies a nomenclature of territorial units for something that was provided by chieftains of the many municipal communities and informally over time, district system, higher levels of political organization developed. And these chieftains phased out by the national government, or the leaders of clan original research. By the end of the Vedic Portugal age, northern India was divided up by 16 major kingdoms and archipelagos of the Azores and Madeira. The ensuing 3 centuries autonomous regions, 600 to 321 BCE, established since time of transition, are either these mainland states Portugal, Portuguese, with each other over Portugal continental. And the most successful state was the one that could most effectively administer its land, mobilize its resources, districts of mainland Portugal are field the largest armies. Beja, Braga, that state, Bragança, Castelo was the kingdom of Magadha, which, by the 4th century BCE, Guarda, had gained control of much Lisbon, of northern India along the Ganges River. Santorum. In 321 BC, the last king of Magadha was overthrown by one of his subjects, the name Chandragupta capital, and a new period in India's history began. Within the European Union nut system, through war and diplomacy, is divided and his 2 successors established control over most of India, forging the first major empire in the history of Madeira and South Asia, and with the Mauryan Empire, 321 to 184 BC into 28 sub-regions. Chandragupta's grandson, King Ashoka, ended the military conquests and European structural through Buddhist principles of non-mismanaged across almost 4 decades. But after his Portuguese time, the empire rapidly declined, and India entered a new stage in its history. And after the Mauryan Empire fell, no one major power had been control over a substantial part of India to bad investments, embezzlement, and accounting from c. 200 BCE the case to 300 CE was particularly saw a fairly rapid turnover of numerous market regional kingdoms, and the political implications. Some of these were located in northern India, along the Ganges River, and some others grew up in the south. maintained
Indian
personal and business relationships with the bank and its CEO. Some kingdoms
who was
emerged
eventually
through foreign
charged
conquest,
and arrested for fraud and
outsiders
other
in
crimes.
Central Asia
On grounds
and the
of
middle,
avoiding a potentially
East saw
serious
India
financial
as a place of
crisis
much
in the
wealth
Portuguese
and sought to
economy,
plunder
the
or rule it.
Portuguese government decided
Thus,
to give them a
throughout
bailout. Eventually,
its history,
at a future
India
loss
was
to
repeatedly
taxpayers
invaded
and
by
to
the
conquerors
Portuguese
coming
people
through
in
mountain
general.
passes in the
Northwest.
Many of
Portugal
these,
is a
like
developed
King
and
Kanishk
high-income
of the Kushan
country.
Empire,
It ranks
c.
highly
100
in peacefulness,
CE,
democracy, press freedom,
notable kingdoms
stability,
that extended from
social
India
progress,
into these neighboring regions
prosperity,
from which
and
they
English
came.
proficiency.
Even after
With a
300
GDP
CE and
per
up to the
capita
15th
of
century,
77%
India was
of the
never
EU
again unified for any
average
length
in 2022,
of time by one large
increase
empire.
from 75%
For that
in
reason,
2021,
historians highlight
and
those kingdoms
HDI
that
of
became
0.866,
substantial
the
regional
38th
powers and
highest
contributed
in the world,
in other
just
important
behind
ways to
Saudi
India's
Arabia's
civilization.
in 2021.
It
Period,
holds the
the 14th
300th
largest
largest
gold
gold
reserve
reserve
at
for
its
instance,
national central
is
bank,
often referred
has
to
the
as
eighth
the
largest
Gupta period
proven
in
reserves
classical
of lithium,
lithium,
with the weight of
the
exports
Guptas,
representing
c.
49%
to
of its
550
GDP in
were rulers who
2022.
forged an impressive
Portugal
empire
has been a
in
net
northern
beneficiary
India.
to the European
As
Union budget since it
their
joined the
empire
Union.
flourished,
Then known
Indian
as
intellectuals
EEC,
were also
in
setting standards for
1986.
excellence in the fields
By the end of
of art,
2022,
architecture,
Portugal's
literature,
GDP
and science,
PPP,
in part because
was
of Gupta patronage, but
$42,341 per capita.
kingdoms also
according to
developed in
OECD's
South India.
report.
The last
By
period covered in
2021,
this chapter
Portugal
is early
had the
medieval
fourth
India,
lowest GDP per
600 to
capita
1,300 CE
of the Eurozone out
after
of
the
19 members,
Gupta
and the eighth
Empire,
lowest of the
and during
European
the following
Union
7th
out of
century,
27
the
member
pattern of
states.
fragmentation intensified.
Several former
as
economically
numerous
disadvantaged
regional
communist
kingdoms,
bloc
large and
countries,
small,
which in the
frequently turned
meanwhile
over,
had become Eastern European
confronting
member
such an
states of the
unstable
EU, had reached
and
or
fluid
surpassed
political
Portugal
scene.
in
Medieval
terms of
kings
GDP,
granted land to
PPP,
loyal subordinate
per
rulers and
capita
high
around
officers
this date.
of their
In
courts.
2021,
The resulting
labor
political
productivity
and
had
economic
fallen to
pattern
the
is
fifth
referred
lowest
to as
among
Indian
the 27
feudalism.
member states of the European
Also,
Union.
kings
EU,
put their greatness
and
on
was
display by
35%
waging war
lower
and
than
building
the EU
magnificent
average,
Hindu temples
with
in
only
their
Latvia, Poland,
capital cities,
Bulgaria, and Greece
and
being
during
lower
the
to
medieval
Portugal
period,
in that
a new
parameter.
political and religious force
In
entered the Indian.
2022, it had
Seen
fallen to the
when
fourth
Muslim
lowest
Arab and
position.
Turkic traders and conquerors
Within
arrived
the
on the
EU,
subcontinent.
Portugal's economy
This
ranks
overview
lower
briefly
than most
summarizes
Western
major
states.
periods in India's political
Portugal
history.
was one of the original
But the history
Eurozone
of
member nations.
a civilization
The
consists
national
of
currency,
more than just
the
rulers
euro
and
started
states,
transitioning
which is why
from the
historians
Portuguese
also
escudo
pay
in
close
2000 and consolidated
attention to
in
social,
2002.
cultural, and economic
Portugal's
life every
central
step of the
bank
way.
is the Banco
This
de
attention
Portugal,
is especially
an integral part of the
important
European
for
system
India.
of central banks.
Although the Asian
Most
subcontinent
industries,
sees a long succession
businesses,
of kingdoms
and financial
and
institutions are
empires
concentrated
and was
in the
usually
Lisbon
divided
and
up by
Porto
several at
metropolitan
any
areas.
particular point
The
in its
Setúbal,
history.
Aveiro,
Peoples over
Braga, Coimbra,
time came to
Leiria,
share some
and
things
Faro
in
districts
common.
are the biggest economic
Socially,
centers
the peoples of
outside
India
these two
were
main
largely
areas.
organized.
By
According
the
to
caste
World
system.
Travel Awards,
Culturally,
Portugal was
the
Europe's
peoples of
leading
India
Gulf
shared in the
destination
development
in
of Hinduism
2012
and 2013.
Buddhism, two major religious
Since the
traditions that
Carnation
shaped people's
Revolution of
understanding of the world and their
1974,
place in it,
which culminated in the end
finally,
of one of
throughout
Portugal's
the
most
ancient and
notable
medieval
phases
periods,
of economic
India
expansion
flourished as a
that started
civilization.
in the 1960s.
Because of its
dynamic
significant
economy
change
has occurred in the
the
nation's
peoples of
annual
India
economic
shared in
growth.
that too,
And that meant they
after
were
the turmoil of the
linked in
1974
networks of trade and
revolution
exchange
and the
not only
period,
with other parts
Portugal
of South Asia
tried to
but
adapt
also
to a
with
changing modern global
neighboring
economy,
regions of the
a process
Afro-Eurasian
that
world
continues in 2013.
Since the 1990s, Portugal's public consumption-based economic development model has been slowly changing to a system that is focused on exports, private investment and the development of the high-tech sector. Consequently, business services have overtaken more traditional industries such as textiles, clothing, footwear and cork. Portugal is the world's leading cork producer, wood products and beverages. In the second decade of the 21st century, the Portuguese economy suffered its most severe recession since the 1970s, resulting in the country having to be bailed out by the European Commission, European Central Bank and International Monetary Fund, IMF. The bailout, agreed to in 2011, required Portugal to enter into a range of austerity measures in exchange for funding support of €78 billion. In May 2014, the country exited the bailout but reaffirmed its commitment to maintaining its reformist momentum. At the time of exiting the bailout, the economy had contracted by 0.7% in the first quarter of 2014, however, unemployment, while still high, had fallen to 15.3%. Continue positive for 2020. In recent years, rents and house prices have skyrocketed in Portugal, particularly in Lisbon, where rents jumped 37% in 2022. Portugal's 8.3% inflation rate in the same year exacerbated the problem. Also, according to the IMF, Portugal's economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic in 2022 was substantially higher than the EU average. Although modest, economic growth is expected to proceed in 2023 while inflation is forecast to continue decreasing to 5.1%. Primary sector. Agriculture in Portugal is based on small to medium-sized family-owned dispersed units. However, the sector also includes larger-scale intensive farming export-oriented agrobusinesses backed by companies, like Grupo Areares Vitacres, Sovina, Lactagal, Vale de Rosa, Companhia das Lazerias and Veluro. The country produces a wide variety of crops and livestock products, including tomatoes, citrus, green vegetables, rice, wheat, barley, maize, olives, oilseeds, nuts, cherries, bilberry, table grapes, edible mushrooms, dairy products, poultry and beef. According to FAO, Portugal is the top producer of cork and carob in the world, accounting to about 50% and 30% of world production, respectively. It is also the third largest exporter of chestnuts and the third largest European producer of pulp. Portugal is among the top 10 largest olive oil producers in the world and is the fourth largest exporter. The country is also one of the world's largest exporters of wine, being reputed for its fine wines. Forestry has also played an important economic role among the rural communities and industry, namely paper industry that includes Portugal Group, engineered wood that includes Sony Industria, and furniture that includes several manufacturing plants in and around Paços de Ferreira, the core of Portugal's major industrial operations of IKEA. In 2001, the gross agricultural product accounted for 4% of the national GDP. Electric vehicles and for storing electricity from the power grid. Europe consumes more than 20% of the global supply of battery-grade lithium but currently has to import all its supplies of the mineral. W Resources stated in 2018 that it had started a new drilling campaign at its São Martinho gold project in Portugal. The so-called reverse circulation drilling program included 15 holes with around 2,000 meters, 6,600 feet, of total drilling. The objective is to extend resources by integrating the data from 2016 drilling results with the expansion expected with the ongoing campaign. Secondary sector. Industry is diversified, ranging from automotive, Volkswagen Auto Europa and Peugeot Citroën, and bicycles, aerospace, Embraer and OGMA, electronics and textiles, to food, chemicals, cement and wood pulp. Volkswagen Group's Auto Europa motor vehicle assembly plant in Palmela is among the largest foreign direct investment projects in Portugal. Modern non-traditional technology-based industries, such as aerospace, biotechnology and information technology, have been developed in several locations across the country. Alverca, Évora and Ponte de Sor are the main centers of the Portuguese aerospace industry, which is led by Brazil-based company Embraer and the Portuguese company OGMA. Following the turn of the 21st century, many major biotechnology and information technology industries have been founded, and are concentrated in the metropolitan areas of Lisbon, Porto, Braga, Coimbra and Aveiro. Tertiary sector. The banking and insurance sectors performed well until the financial crisis of 2007 to 2008, and this partly reflected a rapid deepening of the market in Portugal. While sensitive to various types of market and underwriting risks, it has been estimated that overall both the life and non-life sectors will be able to withstand a number of severe shocks, even though the impact on individual insurers varies widely. Travel and tourism continue to be extremely important for Portugal. It has been necessary for the country to focus upon its niche attractions, such as health, nature and rural tourism, to stay ahead of its competitors. Portugal is among the top 20 most visited countries in the world, receiving an average of 20 million foreign tourists each year. In 2014, Portugal was elected the best European country by USA Today. In 2017, Portugal was elected both Europe's leading destination and in 2018 and 2019, world's leading destination. Tourist hotspots in Portugal are Lisbon, Cascais, Fátima, Algarve, Madeira, Porto and Coimbra. Lisbon attracts the 16th most tourists among European cities, with 7 million tourists occupying the city's hotels in 2006. Notable luxury destinations include the Portuguese Riviera and the Comporta coast. Also, between 5 to 6 million religious pilgrims visit Fátima each year, where apparitions of the Virgin Mary to 3 shepherd children allegedly took place in 1917. The sanctuary of Our Lady of Fátima is one of the largest Roman Catholic shrines in the world. The Portuguese government continues to promote and develop new tourist destinations, such as the Douro Valley, the island of Porto Santo, and Alentejo. The legend of the Rooster of Barcelos tells the story of a dead rooster's miraculous intervention in proving the innocence of a man who had been falsely accused and sentenced to death. The story is associated with the 17th-century Calvary that is part of the collection of the Archaeological Museum located in Paço dos Condes, a Gothic-style palace in Barcelos, a city in northwest Portugal. The Rooster of Barcelos is bought by thousands of tourists as a national souvenir. On November 30, 2016, the United Nations added the Portuguese Bisalhes tradition of making black pottery to the UNESCO Heritage Protection List. On December 7, 2017, the United Nations added the Bonecas Estremas, Toys of Estremas tradition as an UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage of Humankind. Quaternary sector. Scientific and technological research activities in Portugal are mainly conducted within a network of R&D units belonging to public universities and state-managed autonomous research institutions like the INEDI, Instituto Nacional de Engenharia, Tecnologia e Inovação, and the INRB, Instituto Nacional dos Recursos Biológicos. The funding and management of this research system is mainly conducted under the authority of the Ministry of Science, Technology and Higher Education, MCTS, and the Mxas Fundação para a Ciência e Tecnologia, FCT. The Biocant, in Cantanhede, the Madeira Tecnópolo, in Funchal, Science Tecnópolo, in Sines, Tecmeia, in Maia, and Parcurbis, in Covilhã. Companies locate in the Portuguese science parks to take advantage of a variety of services ranging from financial and legal advice through to marketing and technological support. Agos Moniz, a Portuguese physician who developed the cerebral angiography and leucotomy, received in 1949 the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. He is the first Portuguese recipient of a Nobel Prize and the only in the sciences. The European Innovation Scoreboard 2011 placed Portugal-based innovation in the 15th position, with an impressive increase in innovation expenditure and output. Portugal was ranked 30th in the Global Innovation Index in 2023. Transport. By the early 1970s, Portugal's fast economic growth with increasing consumption and purchase of new automobiles set the priority for improvements in transportation. Again in the 1990s, after joining the European Economic Community, the country built many new motorways. Today, the country has a 68,732 kilometers, 42,708 miles, road network, of which almost 3,000 kilometers, 1,864 miles, are part of system of 44 motorways. Opened in 1944, the first motorway, which linked Lisbon to the National Stadium, was an innovative project that made Portugal one of the first countries in the world to establish a motorway. This roadway eventually became the Lisbon-Cascais Highway, or A5. Although a few other tracks were created, around 1960 and 1970, it was only after the beginning of the 1980s that large-scale motorway construction was implemented. In 1972, Brisa, the highway concessionaire, was founded to handle the management of many of the region's motorways. On many highways, a toll needs to be paid, see Via Verde. Vasco da Gama Bridge is the longest bridge in the EU, the second longest in Europe, at 12.345 kilometers. Continental Portugal's 89,015 square kilometers, 34,369 square miles, territory is serviced by 4 international airports located near the principal cities of Lisbon, Porto, Faro and Beja. Lisbon's geographical position makes it a stopover for many foreign airlines at several airports within the country. The primary flag carrier is TAP Air Portugal, although many other domestic airlines provide services within and without the country. The government decided to build a new airport outside Lisbon, to replace Lisbon Portela Airport, though this plan has been suspended due to austerity measures. Currently, the most important airports are in Lisbon, Porto, Faro, Funchal, Madeira, and Ponta Delgada, Azores, managed by the National Airport Authority Group ANA, Aeroportos de Portugal. One other important airport is the Aeroporto Internacional dos Lodges on the island of Terceira in the Azores. This airport serves as one of 2 international airports serving countries outside the European Union for all 9 islands of the Azores. It also serves as a military air base for the United States Air Force. The base remains in use to the present day. A national railway system that extends throughout the country and into Spain, is supported and administered by Comboios de Portugal, CP. Rail transport of passengers and goods is derived using the 2,791 kilometers, 1,734 miles, of railway lines currently in service, of which 1,430 kilometers, 889 miles, are electrified and about 900 kilometers, 559 miles, allow train speeds greater than 120 kilometers per hour, 75 miles per hour. The railway network is managed by Infraestruturas de Portugal, while the transport of passengers and goods are the responsibility of CP, both public companies. In 2006, the CP carried 133 million passengers and 9,750,000 tons, 9,600,000 long tons, 10,700,000 short tons, of goods. The major seaports are located in Sines, Lisbon, Leixões, Setúbal, Aveiro, Figueira da Foz, and Faro. The 2 largest metropolitan areas have subway systems, Lisbon Metro and Metro Sul do Tejo in the Lisbon metropolitan area and Porto Metro in the Porto metropolitan area, each with more than 35 kilometers, 22 miles, of lines. In Portugal, Lisbon tram services have been supplied by the Companhia de Carros de Ferro de Lisboa, Carros, for over a century. In Porto, a tram network, of which only a tourist line on the shores of the Douro remains, began construction on September 12, 1895, a first for the Iberian Peninsula. All major cities and towns have their own local urban transport network, as well as taxi services. Energy. Portugal has considerable resources of wind and river power, the two most cost-effective renewable energy sources. Since the turn of the 21st century, there has been a trend towards the development of a renewable resource industry and reduction of both consumption and use of fossil fuels. In 2006, the world's largest solar power plant at that date, the Moura photovoltaic power station, began operating near Moura, in the south, while the world's first commercial wave power farm, the Agricultura Wave Farm, opened in the Norte region, 2008. By the end of 2006, 66% of the country's electrical production was from coal and fuel power plants, while 29% were derived from hydroelectric dams, and 6% by wind energy. In 2008, renewable energy resources were producing 43% of the nation's consumption of electricity, even as hydroelectric production decreased with severe droughts. As of June 2010, electricity exports had outnumbered imports. In the period between January and May 2010, 70% of the national production of energy came from renewable sources. Portugal's national energy transmission company, Redes Energéticas Nacionais, REN, uses sophisticated modeling to predict weather, especially wind patterns, and computer programs to calculate energy from the various renewable energy plants. Before the solar/wind revolution, Portugal had generated electricity from hydropower plants on its rivers for decades. New programs combine wind and water. Wind-driven turbines pump water uphill at night, the most blustery period, then the water flows downhill by day, generating electricity, when consumer demand is highest. Portugal's distribution system is also now a two-way street. Instead of just delivering electricity, it draws electricity from even the smallest generators, like rooftop solar panels. The government aggressively encouraged such contributions by setting a premium price for those who buy rooftop-generated solar electricity. Demographics. Communities in Portugal included Azorians 246,772, 2.3%, Madeirans 267,785, 2.5%, and Roma 30,000 to 70,000, 0.3 to 0.7%. Other important communities in Portugal comprised persons with the following origin or descent: Cape Verde 61,953, 0.6%, Ukrainians 33,790, 0.3%, Brazilians 139,703, 1.3%. Angola 162,604, 1.5%, Mozambican 73,084, 0.7%, Guinea-Bissau 29,578, 0.3%, Asians 32,853, 0.3%, and São Tomé and Príncipe 18,645, 0.2%. Urbanization. Based on commuting patterns, OECD and Eurostat define 8 metropolitan areas of Portugal. Only 2 have populations over 1 million, and since the 2013 local government reform, these are the only 2 which also have administrative legal status of metropolitan areas: Lisbon and Porto. Several smaller metropolitan areas, Algarve, Aveiro, Coimbra, Minho and Viseu, also held this status from 2003 to 2008, when they were converted into intermunicipal communities, whose territories are, roughly, based on the NUT's 3 statistical regions. Largest cities or towns in Portugal. 2022 estimate. Rank. Name. Region. Population. 1 Lisbon Lisboa 548,703. 2 Sintra Lisboa 388,767. 3 Vila Nova de Gaia Norte 307,563. 4 Porto Norte 240,592. 5 Cascais Lisboa 213,928. 6 Loures Lisboa 203,724. 7 Braga Norte 197,594. 8 Almada Lisboa 178,254. 9 Matosinhos Norte 176,617. 10 Amadora Lisboa 174,511. 11 Oeiras Lisboa 172,742. 12 Seixal Lisboa 169,797. 13 Gondomar Norte 166,900. 14 Guimarães Norte 156,277. 15 Odivelas Lisboa 150,366. 16 Coimbra Centro. Santa 142,252. 17 Maria de Norte. Feira Vila 138,344. 18 Franca de Lisboa. Zaira Vila Nova 137,994. 19 de Norte Famalicão 134,883. 20 Leiria Centro 130,605. Immigration. Without due documentation or work contracts, make up over 90% of agricultural workers in the south of Portugal. Most are Indo-Asians, from India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan and Thailand. In the interior of the Alentejo there are many African workers. Significant numbers also come from Eastern Europe, Moldova, Ukraine, Romania and Brazil. In addition, a number of EU citizens, mostly from Italy, France, Germany or other northern European countries, have become permanent residents in the country. There is also a large expatriate community made up of Britons, Canadians and people from the United States of America. The British community is mostly composed of retired pensioners who live in the Algarve and Madeira. Religion. Roman Catholicism, which has a long history in Portugal, remains the dominant religion. Portugal has no official religion, though in the past, the Catholic Church in Portugal was the state religion. According to the 2021 census, 80.2% of the Portuguese population was Roman Catholic Christian. The country has small Protestant, Latter-day Saint, Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, Eastern Orthodox Church, Jehovah's Witnesses, Baha'i, Buddhist, Jewish and Spiritist communities. Influences from African traditional religion and Chinese traditional religion are also felt among many people, particularly in fields related with traditional Chinese medicine and traditional African herbal medicine. Some 14.1% of the population declared themselves to be non-religious. Many Portuguese holidays, festivals and traditions have a Christian origin or connotation. Although relations between the Portuguese state and the Roman Catholic Church were generally amiable and stable since the earliest years of the Portuguese nation, their relative power fluctuated. In the 13th and 14th centuries, the Church enjoyed power and close identification with early Portuguese nationalism and the foundation of the Portuguese educational system, including its first university. The growth of the Portuguese overseas empire made its missionaries important agents of colonization, with important roles in the education and evangelization of people from all the inhabited continents. The growth of liberal and nascent republican movements during the eras leading to the formation of the First Portuguese Republic, 1910–26, changed the role and importance of organized religion. Portugal is a secular state. Church and state were formally separated during the First Portuguese Republic, and this was reiterated in the 1976 Portuguese Constitution. Other than the Constitution, the two most important documents relating to religious freedom in Portugal are the 1940 Concordato, later amended in 1971, between Portugal and the Holy See, and the 2001 Religious Freedom Act. Languages. Portuguese is the official language of Portugal. It is a Romance language that is derived from Galician Portuguese, which was spoken in what is now Galicia and northern Portugal. There are still strong similarities between the Galician and Portuguese cultures. Galicia is a consultative observer of the community of Portuguese language countries. The Portuguese language is derived from the Latin spoken by the Romanized pre-Roman peoples of the Iberian Peninsula around 2,000 years ago, particularly the Celts, Conii, Lusitanians and Turguli. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the language spread worldwide as Portugal established a colonial and commercial empire between 1415 and 1999. Portuguese is spoken as a native language in 5 different continents, with Brazil accounting for the largest number of native Portuguese speakers of any country. In 2013, the Portuguese language is the official language spoken in Brazil, Angola, Mozambique, Cape Verde, São Tomé and Príncipe, Guinea-Bissau, Equatorial Guinea, and East Timor. These countries, plus Macau Special Administrative Region, People's Republic of China, where Portuguese is co-official with Cantonese, make up the Lusosphere, a term derived from the ancient Roman province of Lusitania, which currently matches the Portuguese territory south of the Douro River. Mirandese is also recognized as a co-official regional language in some municipalities of northeastern Portugal. It is part of the Astur-Leonese group of languages. An estimate of between 6,000 and 7,000 Mirandese speakers has been documented for Portugal. Furthermore, a particular dialect known as Baranquenho, spoken in Barrancos, is also officially recognized and protected in Portugal since 2021. Mindarico, a sociolect of the Portuguese language, is spoken by around 500 people in the town of Mind. According to the International English Proficiency Index, Portugal has a high proficiency level in English, higher than those of other Romance-speaking European countries like Spain, Italy or France. Education. The educational system is divided into preschool, for those under age 6, basic education, 9 years, in 3 stages, compulsory, secondary education, 3 years, compulsory since 2010, and higher education, subdivided in university and polytechnic education. Universities are usually organized into faculties. Institutes and schools are also common designations for autonomous subdivisions of Portuguese higher education institutions. The total adult literacy rate in Portugal was 99.8% in 2021 and 100% of primary school enrollments. According to the Programme for International Student Assessment, PISA, 2018, Portugal scored around the OECD average in reading, mathematics and science. In reading and mathematics, mean performance in 2018 was close to the level observed in 2009 to 2015. In science, mean performance in 2018 was below that of 2015, and returned close to the level observed in 2009 and 2012, near below average. About 46.9% of college-age citizens, 20 years old, attend one of Portugal's higher education institutions, compared with 50% in the United States and 35% in the OECD countries. In addition to being a destination for international students, Portugal is also among the top places of origin for international students. All higher education students, both domestic and international, totaled 380,937 in 2005. Portuguese universities have existed since 1290. The oldest Portuguese university was first established in Lisbon before moving to Coimbra. Historically, within the scope of the Portuguese Empire, the Portuguese founded the oldest engineering school of the Americas, the Real Academia de Fortificação e Desenho of Rio de Janeiro, in 1792, as well as the oldest medical college in Asia, the Escola Médico-Cirúrgica of Goa, in 1842. Presently, the largest university in Portugal is the University of Lisbon. The Bologna process has been adopted by Portuguese universities and polytechnical institutes in 2006. Higher education in state-run educational establishments is provided on a competitive basis. A system of numerous clauses is enforced through a national database on student admissions. However, every higher education institution offers also a number of additional vacant places through other extraordinary admission processes for sportsmen, mature applicants, over 23 years old, international students, foreign students from the Lusosphere, degree owners from other institutions, students from other institutions, academic transfer, former students, readmission, and course change, which are subject to specific standards and regulations set by each institution or course department. Most student costs are supported with public money. However, with the increasing tuition fees a student has to pay to attend a Portuguese state-run higher education institution and the attraction of new types of students, many as international students and part-time students or in evening classes, like employees, businessmen, parents, pensioners and foreigners, most prominently from Brazil, a Portuguese-speaking country, many departments make a substantial profit from every additional student enrolled in courses, with benefits for the college or university's gross tuition revenue and without, citation needed, loss of educational quality, teacher per student, computer per student, classroom size per student, etc. Portugal has entered into cooperation agreements with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and other U.S. institutions to further develop and increase the effectiveness of Portuguese higher education and research. Health. Diseases, CVD, is higher than in the Eurozone, but its two main components, ischemic heart disease and cerebrovascular disease, display inverse trends compared with the Euro, with cerebrovascular disease being the single biggest killer in Portugal, 17%. Portuguese people die 12% less often from cancer than in the Euro, but mortality is not declining as rapidly as in the Euro. Cancer is more frequent among children as well as among women younger than 44 years. Although lung cancer, slowly increasing among women, and breast cancer, decreasing rapidly, are scarcer, cervical cancer and prostate cancer are more frequent. Portugal has the highest mortality rate for diabetes in the Euro, with a sharp increase since the 1980s. Portugal's infant mortality rate is around 2 deaths per 1,000 newborns, with 2.4 deaths per 1,000 live births. Only 1/3 of adults rated their health as good or very good in Portugal, Casmel et al., 2004. This is the lowest of the Euro countries reporting and reflects the relatively adverse situation of the country in terms of mortality and selected morbidity. Hospital de Santa Maria is the largest university hospital in Portugal. Culture. Portugal has developed a specific culture while being influenced by various civilizations that have crossed the Mediterranean and the European continent, or were introduced when it played an active role during the Age of Discovery. In the 1990s and 2000s decade, Portugal modernized its public cultural facilities, in addition to the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation established in 1956 in Lisbon. These include the Belém Cultural Center in Lisbon, Serralves Foundation and the Casa de Música, both in Porto, as well as new public cultural facilities like municipal libraries and concert halls that were built or renovated in many municipalities across the country. Portugal is home to 17 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, ranking it 9th in Europe and 18th in the world. Architecture. Traditional architecture is distinctive and include the Manuline, also known as Portuguese Late Gothic, a sumptuous, composite Portuguese style of architectural ornamentation of the first decades of the 16th century, followed by Pombaline style of the 18th century. A 20th century interpretation of traditional architecture, soft Portuguese style, appears extensively in major cities, especially Lisbon. Modern Portugal has given the world-renowned architects like Eduardo Souto de Moura, Álvaro Siza Vieira, both Pritzker Prize winners, and Goncalo Byrne. In Portugal, Tomás Tavera is also noteworthy, particularly for stadium design. The azulejo is a mainstream, typical element among Portugal's traditional building materials and construction techniques. Cinema. Portuguese cinema has a long tradition, reaching back to the birth of the medium in the late 19th century. Antonio Lopes Ribeiro, Antonio Reis, Pedro Costa, Manuel de Oliveira, João César Monteiro, José Fonseca e Costa, Edgar Pera, Antonio Pedro Vasconcelos, Fernando Lopes, João Botelho, João Mario Grillo and Leonel Vieira, are among those that gained notability. Noted Portuguese film actors include Joaquim de Almeida, Nuno Lopes, Daniela Rua, Maria de Medeiros, Diogo Infante, Soraya Chavez, Ribeirão, Lucia Moniz, and Diogo Morgado. Cuisine. Portuguese cuisine is very diverse. Different regions have their own traditional dishes. The Portuguese have a culture of good food, and throughout the country there are myriad good restaurants and typical small tasquinhas. The Portuguese consume a lot of dry cod, bacalhau in Portuguese, for which there are hundreds of recipes ranging from bacalhau à Brás to bacalhau à Gomes de Sá, among many other popular examples such as bacalhau com natas. Two other popular fish recipes are grilled sardines and caldeirada, a tomato-based stew that can be made from several types of fish or mollusks with a mix of onion, garlic, bay leaf, potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, parsley or coriander. Typical Portuguese meat recipes made out of the customary beef, pork, chicken, goat, lamb or duck meat, include cozido à portuguesa, feijoada, frango de churrasco, leitão, roast suckling pig, chanfana and carne de porco à alentejana. A very popular northern dish is dobrada, a tripe with white beans and carrot stew, often served with steamed white rice, and the related tripas à moda do Porto, which is a traditional dish from Porto. Peri-peri chicken is a spicy charcoal chicken dish served with fries or rice and vegetables, a favorite throughout Portugal, but most common in the Algarve region. Typical fast food dishes include the francesinha, Frenchy, from Porto and baifanas, grilled pork, or prego, grilled beef, sandwiches, which are well known around the country. The Portuguese art of pastry has its origins in the many medieval Catholic monasteries spread widely across the country. These monasteries, using very few ingredients, mostly eggs, vanilla, cinnamon, flour, almonds and some liqueurs, managed to create a spectacular wide range of different pastries, of which pastéis de Belém, or pastéis de nata, originally from Lisbon, pastéis de Portugal from the Baixo-Mondego Valley, ovos moles from Aveiro and tigeladas from Abrantes, are examples. Portuguese wines have enjoyed international recognition since the times of the Romans, who associated Portugal with their god Bacchus. Today, the country is known by wine lovers and its wines have won several international prizes. Some of the best Portuguese wines are Vinho Verde, Vinho Alvarinho, Vinho do Douro, Vinho do Alentejo, Vinho do Dão, Vinho de Beirada, and the sweet port wine, Madeira wine, and the Moscatel from Setúbal and Faveios. Port and Madeira are particularly appreciated in a wide range of places around the world. Fashion and design. Industrialized, export-oriented fashion and design in clothing, footwear, kitchenware and furniture industries was pioneered by fashion designers like Eduarda Abundanza, Mario Matos Ribeiro, Ana Salazar, José Antonio Tenante, João Tomé, Francisco Pontes or Manuela Goncalves, as well as textile industry industrialists established in places like Vale do Ave, in clothing. Several entrepreneurs of the Portuguese footwear industry, Vista Alegre Atlantis and Rafael Bordalo Pinheiro, in tableware and kitchenware, and businesspersons of the old established furniture industry heavily concentrated in and around places such as Paços de Ferreira and Paredes. Corkware and other cork-based products such as furniture, decorative items and floor and wall coatings, are also distinctive products found among typical designer creations of Portuguese origin. Filigree began to be produced in Portugal in the 8th century with the arrival of Arab migrants after the Umayyad invasion of Iberian Peninsula, who brought new patterns with them. With time, the peninsula began to produce different filigree patterns, but while in Spain the filigree jewellery-making tradition became less relevant, in Portugal it was perfected. After the 18th century, Portuguese filigree already had its own distinctive imagery, motifs, and shapes. Filigree from the 17th and 18th centuries became famous for their extraordinary complexity. Gold and silver filigree jewelry of delicate and artistic design is still made in considerable quantities throughout the country, particularly filigree hearts, which are iconic symbols of Portuguese jewelry making. Literature. Portuguese literature, one of the earliest Western literatures, developed through text as well as song. Until 1350, the Portuguese Galician troubadours spread their literary influence to most of the Iberian Peninsula, like King Dinis, 1261–1325, who became famous for his poetry. Other kings would write and sponsor works of literature across Portuguese history, like Fernando, 1367–1383, who supported Pero Menino in writing O Livro de Falcoaria. Another notable name in Portuguese literature is Gil Vicente, c. 1465–c. 1536, one of the founders of Portuguese dramatic traditions. Adventurer and poet Luís de Camões, circa 1524–1580, wrote the epic poem Os Lusíadas, the Lusíads, with Virgil's Aeneid as his main influence. Modern Portuguese poetry is rooted in neoclassic and contemporary styles, as exemplified by Bocage, 1765–1805, and Antero de Quental, 1842–1891, and Fernando Pessoa, 1888–1935. Modern Portuguese literature is represented by authors such as Almeida Garrett, Camilo Castelo Branco, Eca de Queiroz, Fernando Pessoa, Sofia de Mello Brainer Andresen, Antonio Lobo Antunes, Miguel Torga and Agostina Bessa Luís. Particularly popular and distinguished is José Saramago, recipient of the 1998 Nobel Prize in Literature. Music. Portuguese music encompasses a wide variety of genres. The traditional one is the Portuguese folk music, which has deep roots in local customs, utilizing instruments such as bagpipes, gaita, drums, flutes, tambourines, accordions and ukuleles, cavaquinho. Within Portuguese folk music is the renowned genre of fado, a melancholic urban music originated in Lisbon in the 19th century, probably inside bohemian environments, usually associated with the Portuguese guitar and saudade, or longing. Coimbra fado, a unique type of troubadour serenading fado, is also noteworthy. Internationally notable performers include Amalia Rodriguez, Carlos Paredes, José Afonso, Marisa, Carlos do Carmo, Antonio Chainho, Migia, Dulce Pontes and Medredius. In the classical music domain, Portugal is represented by names as the pianists Artur Pizarro, Maria João Pires, Sequeira Costa, the violinists Carlos Damas, Gerardo Ribeiro, and in the past by the great cellist Guilherme Assugia. Notable composers include Marcos Portugal, José Viana da Mata, Carlos Seixas, João Domingos Bumtempo, João de Sousa Carvalho, Luís de Freitas Branco and his student Jolie Braga Santos, Fernando Lopes Graca, Emmanuel Nunes and Sergio Azevedo. Similarly, contemporary composers such as Nuno Malo and Miguel de Oliveira have achieved some international success writing. In addition to folk, fado and classical music, other genres are present at Portugal like pop and other types of modern music, particularly from North America and the United Kingdom, as well as a wide range of Portuguese, Caribbean, Lusophone African and Brazilian artists and bands. Artists with international recognition include Dulce Pontes, Moonspell, Baraka Som Sistema, Blasted Mechanism, David Carrera and The Gift, with the three latter being nominees for a MTV Europe Music Award. Portugal has several summer music festivals, such as Festival Sudoeste in Zambujeira do Mar, Festival de Paredes de Cura in Paredes de Cura, Festival Vilar de Mouros near Camina, Boom Festival in Idanha Nova Municipality, Nossa Live, Sumul Summer Fest in Ericeira, Rock in Rio Lisboa and Superboc Super Rock in Greater Lisbon. Out of the summer season, Portugal has a large number of festivals, designed more to an urban audience, like Flowfest or Hip Hop Porto. One of the largest international Goa trance festivals takes place in central Portugal every 2 years, the Boom Festival. That is also the only festival in Portugal to win international awards. European Festival Award 2010, Green and Clean Festival of the Year and the Greener Festival Award Outstanding 2008 and 2010. The student festivals of Queima das Fitas, which are major events in a number of cities across Portugal, show every year a selection of well-established, high-profile musicians and bands to the public as well as newer, on the rise, upcoming success artists seeking definite recognition. In 2005, Portugal held the MTV Europe Music Awards, in Pavilhão Atlântico, Lisbon. Furthermore, Portugal won the Eurovision Song Contest 2017 in Kiev with the song, Amar pelos dois, presented by Salvador Sobral, and subsequently hosted the 2018 contest at the Altus Arena in Lisbon. Sport. Football is the most popular sport in Portugal. There are several football competitions ranging from local amateur to world-class professional level. All-time greats Eusebio and Cristiano Ronaldo are major symbols of Portuguese football history. Portuguese football managers are also noteworthy, with José Mourinho and Abel Ferreira being among the most renowned. The Portugal national football team, Seleção Nacional, have won one UEFA European Championship title, the UEFA Euro 2016, with a 1-0 victory in the final over France, the tournament hosts. In addition, Portugal finished first in the 2018-19 UEFA Nations League finals held in Portugal, second in the Euro 2004, also held in Portugal, third in the 1966 FIFA World Cup and 2017 FIFA Confederations Cup, and fourth in the 2006 FIFA World Cup. At youth level, Portugal have won 2 FIFA World Youth Championships, in 1989 and 1991, and several UEFA European Youth Championships. SL Benfica, Sporting CP and FC Porto are the largest sports clubs by popularity and by number of trophies won, often known as Os Tres Grandes, the Big Three. They have won 8 titles in the European UEFA club competitions, were present in 21 finals and have been regular contenders in the last stages almost every season. Other than football, many Portuguese sports clubs, including the Big Three, compete in several other sports events with a varying level of success and popularity. These may include roller hockey, basketball, futsal, handball, volleyball and athletics. The Portuguese Football Federation, FPF, Federação Portuguesa de Futebol, annually hosts the Algarve Cup, a prestigious women's football tournament that has been celebrated in the Portuguese region of Algarve. The Portuguese national rugby union team qualified for the 2007 Rugby World Cup, and the Portuguese national rugby sevens team has played in the World Rugby 7 series. In athletics, the Portuguese have won a number of gold, silver and bronze medals in the European, World and Olympic Games competitions. Road cycling, with Volta a Portugal being the most important race, is also a popular sports event and includes professional cycling teams such as Sporting CP, Boa Vista, Clube de Ciclismo de Tavira and União Ciclista de Maia. At international level, Portuguese cyclists have already achieved good results. Joaquim Agostinho finished on the podium in 1978 and 1979 Tour de France, and 1974 Vuelta a España. Rui Costa has won the world title in the men's road race. The country has also achieved notable performances in sports including fencing, judo, kitesurf, rowing, sailing, surfing, shooting, taekwondo, triathlon and windsurfing, winning several European and world titles. Portugal's Paralympic athletes have also won many medals in sports including swimming, bocha, athletics, mixed martial arts and wrestling. In motorsport, Portugal is internationally noted for the Rally of Portugal, and the Estoril and Algarve circuits, as well as the revived Porto Street Circuit, which holds a stage of the WTCC every 2 years, as well as for a number of internationally noted pilots and racers such as Miguel Oliveira, Tiago Monteiro, Antonio Felix da Costa, Felipe Albuquerque, Pedro Lamy, Armindo Araujo and others in a wide range of varied motorsports. In equestrian sports, Portugal won the only Horseball Pato World Championship in 2006, achieved the 3rd position in the first Horseball World Cup and has achieved several victories in the European Working Equitation Championship. In water sports, Portugal has 3 major sports: swimming, water polo and surfing. Most recently, Portugal had success in canoeing with several world and European champions, such as Olympic medalists. Annually, the country also hosts one of the stages of the World Surf League Men's and Women's Championship Tour, the MEO RIP Curl Pro Portugal at the Supertubos in Peniche. Northern Portugal has its own original martial art, Jogo do Pau, in which the fighters use staffs to confront one or several opponents. Other popular sport-related recreational outdoor activities with thousands of enthusiasts nationwide include airsoft, fishing, golf, hiking, hunting and orienteering. Portugal is one of the world's best golf destinations. It has received several awards by the World Golf Awards. High-profile, successful competitive athleticism and sportsmanship in Portugal can be traced back to the time of ancient Rome. Gaius Apuleius Diocles, 104, after 146 AD, was a noteworthy charioteer born in Lamgo who became one of the most celebrated athletes in ancient history. He is often cited as the highest-paid athlete of all time. Visual arts. Portugal has a rich history in painting. The first well-known painters dating back to the 15th century, like Nuno Goncalves and Vasco Fernandes, were part of the late Gothic painting period. During the Renaissance, Portuguese painting was highly influenced by Northern European painting. In the Baroque period, Josefa de Abidos and Vieira Lusitano were the most prolific painters. José Malhoa, known for his work Fado, and Columbano Bordalo Pinheiro, who painted the portraits of Teofilo Braga and Antero de Quental, were both references in naturalist painting. The 20th century saw the arrival of modernism, and along with it came the most prominent Portuguese painters, Amadeo de Sousa Cardoso, who was heavily influenced by French painters, particularly the Delaunay's, Robert and Sonia. Among his best-known works is Canção Popular a Russa e o Figaro. Other great modernist painters/writers include Carlos Botelho and Almada Negreiros, friend to the poet Fernando Pessoa, who painted Pessoa's portrait. He was deeply influenced by both Cubist and Futurist trends. Prominent international figures in visual arts nowadays include painters Vieira da Silva, Julio Pomar, Helena Almeida, Joana Vasconcelos, Julio Sarmento, and Paula Rigo.